to the Mortal Realms, an Age of Sigmar story phase. Grab your hammer so we can clear a path through the chaos and forge our own narratives in the Age of Sigmar. Your allies through the Stormkeep this episode are...
My name is Paul, and did you guys know that they actually have accountants for the Stormcast?
I didn't know.
No.
They're called decimalators.
All right. And I'm Aaron. And which faction will we be covering today? The answer may shock you.
And I'm Will, long-time listener, first-time host, and I promise that I'm not going to get too thunderstruck.
You can't promise that. In this episode, we cover the lore of the Stormcast Eternals Battletome. Get ready to hear a whole lot of Drake, Imagine Dragons, and DragonForce. And then if we have time after all that, we'll talk about those Sigmarines. Just to pause, I want to call out the fact that I use Sigmarines because I don't think after this book anyone will ever be able to call them Sigmarines ever again. So I think this is the official last time that this term can ever be used.
Nice.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Good.
Doing great.
I'm doing fantastic.
I'm glad to hear it. Everyone, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but I am back. I know we had a lot of fun in my absence. Yeah, backity back, in fact. But the party's over. The cat has returned. The mice can no longer play. And I'm here to crack that whip and get us back under control. So we're gonna lock it up. We're gonna have a serious, no nonsense story phase with my two friends, Paul and Will. What the audience may say, you may be wondering to yourselves, Will, that's a name I don't necessarily recognize. First of all, you're telling on yourself because that means you haven't been listening to a little ditty I like to call Path to Story, a new podcast that these two have generated, created from the muck, and are kicking off the ground, and it's really awesome. And so I figured we got to bring the two of them on the story phase. Obviously, Paul's here every time. I feel like I don't want to undersell that, but to give us a glimpse into the things that they're up to over on that Path to Story. So with that long-winded and rambling introduction, guys, I want to know more about this Path to Story. Pretend I haven't listened. Which I have. Honest to God, hand on my heart, I have listened to everything that's been out. Welcome.
So, Path to Story is a Path to Glory narrative Age of Sigmar podcast. So it's kind of, how when Games Workshop makes a new race, they kind of take something that you already know, and then they twist it like 45 degrees, and then they're like, okay, we've got something new, so we're going to release that. Yeah, that's basically exactly what we did. So we have a lore podcast here on the Mortal Realms of the Story Phase, and this is a lore podcast where we game in order to create our lore. So this is something that like Aaron is probably completely terrified of.
Wait a sec, so you guys have to play games?
No, right?
Yeah,
and we have to
whole
have
game
models.
attached to this.
No, thank you.
Yeah, exactly. So
Hard pass.
We've even done conversions.
A lot of conversions.
I'm sorry, I just blanked out for a second.
It's good. It's okay though.
So where are we at with this Path to Story? Tell me how far we've come. What do you give me a glimpse into what you guys are actually like? What you're doing?
So I think at this point, it's fair to say that we have got all the introductory stuff out of the way. We are going to be releasing episode 2, which has already been recorded. So the long-winded explanation of why we exist and who we are. And we should also very much mention that we are missing the third member of our podcast, which is Spencer. And Spencer is an indispensable part of our podcast. And I'm not joking. I know, right? I worked on that super hard for like 0.3 seconds. Because Spencer's job, and which she is very good at, is to tell us to be quiet when we are being ridiculous and ununderstandable, which is super important. So, Will, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So, part of what Spencer does is fill the role of reminding us that not everyone listens to the Mortal Realms podcast.
Excuse me.
Horror.
Right,
oh, my goodness.
Right. They're out there. And some people who may be listening and may be wanting to get into the hobby may not have all of this background lore on the Mortal Realms, on the Age of Sigmar, on how the game works as a whole. And she really gets us to take a step back, and when we say something like Sigmar and Dracothian and Olgu and Gur, to stop what we're doing explain what we're saying to make sure that we're not speaking a foreign language.
It's very helpful. And if you're into your lore, which I assume you are if you're listening to the story phase, and you like to hear people play narrative gaming, definitely check us out. Path to Story.
You guys heard it here first, unless, of course, you've already listened to it, in which case you heard it there first.
And here second.
And here second.
And maybe in our Discord, themortalrealms.com/Discord third, maybe.
Oh, yes. In that order of operations. Perfect. I've listened to everything you guys put out so far. I've enjoyed it. I'm very interested in Path to Glory, but I just don't have time to play the games. And so this is going to be my not introduction, but like I'm going to live vicariously through you. What better way to live vicariously through some folks is through narrative gaming, podcasting.
Sweet.
Yeah, so I'm excited to see what your folks are gonna end up doing with it. I can't wait to see where it goes.
Me too.
But now that that's out of the way, we're still going to gab before we actually get to the story phase. I'd love to hear maybe just a quick blurb, a quick delve into what you guys have been up to in the hobby. Let's start with Will, who's the guest, like the guest first.
Guest first.
What you been working on?
So I've been working on Stormcast. Craziest thing.
Crazy.
Part of it has been like painting and converting up my force for Path to Story. And then the other part is I got tagged as a last minute player for Holy Havoc.
Sweet.
Happening in the first weekend of November. So since it's all last minute, I have been furiously painting all of my Stormcast.
I like the idea of you doing it angrily, incredibly furious about it. Yeah.
Painting is not a calm thing. I don't, fast and furious.
Yeah. That's awesome. Have you been to a Holy event at all? Holy Havoc or Wars?
To a single wargaming event, period.
Oh my god!
I'm just diving in feet first.
What a way to start. Good job.
Yeah, you're gonna be a little spoiled.
That's what I hear. I'm gonna be spoiled, and you know what? I can live with that.
Yeah, right.
Okay, that's it.
That's awesome. Paul, have you been to any of the Holy events?
I have not. No, I have to limit my abandoning of my children for multiple days to only.
Abandoning is a strong word.
It's true. It's true, but
just leaving alone for long stretches of time. Because I know Eric, and I'm pretty sure Eric and Davy went to the Holy Havoc at least once. They're not here to talk about it, but they spoke very highly of it, and I've heard nothing but great things. It's in Naperville, Illinois, I want to say, which is a shame because I grew up one town over for years and years, but have long since moved away, and most of my family moved away, so I don't see myself getting down there anytime soon. But maybe one day I'll make the trip down and revisit the old stomping grounds at a Holy event. Fingers crossed, one day. Very neat. Is there anything else you've been working on that you want to talk about?
No, painting up Stormcast and doing Path to Story is taking up every second of my free time.
I was going to say, is that not enough, Aaron? Come on.
Yeah, come on, man.
Hey, Paul, what you been up to?
I have been painting up an Underworld warband, the Dark Oath one, and I'm just blanking on the name because I'm doing it as a. Go ahead.
Godsworn Hunt.
Thank you. I'm doing it as a paint test for my Living City army that I am doing for Path to Story, and also just today I broke out my priest figure for the Immortal Citizens Project to get that done for this month. So
it's like the 20th. You only have a couple more days.
Yeah, but I already had it completely done and converted, and so I just need to paint it. And painting, it's a scheme I've already painted on like 50 or 60 miniatures, so it shouldn't take me that long.
I like how your painting step is like that's the no big deal step where that the one that literally stops me dead in my tracks. Right on.
I got a paint scheme real quick.
Yeah.
Fortunately, Godsworn Hunt, guys. We're it seems as if we're going to be getting more Dark Oath stuff. What a coincidence for you, Paul. Awesome. Yeah.
No,
hashtag
it's very coincidental. Well, and the other day I was working on an Arachnarok, so it seems like we're getting some spiders too. So
fingers crossed. Yeah, whatever Paul's working on is what's going to be released. Paul, start working on some wood elves next, please.
Oh man, I could do that. I'm actually assembling Farstriders right now. first Stormcast. So we're going to get more Stormcast next. You heard it here first.
Oh man, thank goodness we were running low. And what have I been working on? Raising a baby, and slowly but surely working on some Nurgle stuff. And by my version of working on is just assembling things. But I'm trying to think the last time I was on any sort of show. And that I knocked out some a fiver of Blight Kings. Nice. And then I've been working through the what is it called? Blight War. Where's the box? Yeah, Blight War. So I'm in the middle of the Plague Bears currently. And then I'll do the Plague Drones, and then that'll all be done. I'll take all that Nurgle stuff. I'll put it in a box. I'll never look at it again. And we'll move on to some other assembly project.
Secure in the knowledge it will never wake up and smother you in your sleep.
I don't know. I'm not that secure in it, and my wife is probably less secure in that knowledge. And actually, the very, very most recent hobby I did is I was putting away some of the Warcry terrain again in a box, never to be looked at again. And I bent one of those dangly skeleton bits off the bell tower.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know. Like, God, why did they think that was okay? It's not okay, guys. It's wrong. And I have to figure out how to certify that up. I guess green stuff. I don't know what's green stuff.
It's something used for conversions, which is where you assemble the model not as intended. You sound like your child right now.
Gross. Yeah, actually, more than you know. So that is that. Guys, you want to do a little story phase? Just a little one? Just a little.
Just a little bit.
A little foray.
Yeah, not the most amount of lore on any battle tome that we've ever read. No.
Just a heavy tome. Yeah. I think to get into the story phase, I think Paul has the key, and it's his dulcet tones.
The story phase. In the story phase, we delve into the stories, characters, creatures, and environments of the 9 realms.
So dulcet. I don't actually know what the word dulcet means, but I love using it. I think it is often used to reference tones and like voices and things, and so I think that it probably applies. All right, we're here. We're talking about Stormcast. It's weird that we are in year of this podcast. I don't know how long it's been. We've covered many battle tomes, but never gotten around to the
granddaddy.
Yeah, the poster boys. Yep, all of these are true.
The golden boys.
And the longer we put it off, the less less enthused I was to do it, because it just seems like it was just building and building, and there was so much more being added on top of it that it seemed like this insurmountable discussion topic. However, kind of in a little bit of a drought for Age of Sigmar, run out of things to talk about. So how about we just pull the trigger, huh? There's no time like the present. The best time to do a Stormcast Battletome review is 5 years ago. The second best time is now.
Exactly.
And so let's bite the bullet and get in there, get our hands dirty. But let's do it, and we'll be happy that we'll did. It'll be a big weight off our shoulders eventually. So Battletomes. How do we start our Battletomes? First things first. I'm going to put you guys on the spot. I apologize. I'm not that sorry. What I need from you is your own. Don't copy it from anywhere. Your own one-sentence description of this faction, off the cuff, off the dome. We're freestyling here. If you wanted to give someone a one-sentence pitch as to what this army was, maybe you have recently with Spencer, right? Maybe this is how you would have pitched it to her. How would you describe this faction in one sentence? It can be as long as you want. Run-on sentences encouraged. Let's start with Paul. He's got the most expertise in this.
All right. I would describe them as bound soul, fully armored, lightning riding, dragon riding, seekers of vengeance in the mortal realms, and deliverers of order and justice.
Both order and justice. Whew, you snuck that one in. All right. So that, I agree wholeheartedly. Secondly, is a tough act to follow. Will, do you think you can do him one better?
No, but I'll give you my one sentence.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry. No, yeah, that's all I really can ask.
There, yeah. I would say, formerly mortal, these heroes of Sigmar bring the storm of war against the enemies of the realms at the cost of their own souls.
Ooh.
Oh, succinct, but then like haunting a little bit at the same time. Like I can envision that being said, with like an echo effect, right? As if we're in like some sort of large cavern or like
thunder vision.
Yeah, thunder. You got it. That's for sure, man. I'm not gonna be able to sleep tonight after that one.
I like the Storm of War. That was pretty good.
Yeah, that was great. It's very poetic.
Yeah.
So here's the deal. This segment is, I think, wholly for me. I don't know if anybody else likes it, and quite frankly, I don't care if anybody else likes it because I do it for you. Gotta love what you do, and what I do is make other people give one sentence summaries of factions. So thank you for that. It made my evening. So that's the Stormcast, and everything else that we're going to talk about is maybe unimportant. Like if you wanted to stop listening now, you could, dear listener, but I don't recommend it.
Don't. No, I mean we worked really hard to actually make the rest of this really good too. So, but yeah,
I didn't work that hard. All right, so we've got the one sentence, but maybe let's take a step back. We're gonna take a little bit of a history lesson here and walk through step by step how we got to where we are and how the Stormcast got to where they are currently. So, where should we start? I guess we should start at the beginning, as Paul knows, because it's a very good place to start. Back in the Age of Myth. I'll ask, just generally, anybody can take it. What was going on in the Age of Myth as it relates to our heroes of Azir, basically. Obviously, they haven't existed yet at this point. This predates our Stormcast. What was going on back in the Age of Myth? Anyone who feels like jumping in?
Yeah, I'll take it. Because the first thing the books talk about has initially nothing to do with Sigmar or the Stormcast. Even though it's their book, the first thing we see is a story of dragons and story of Dracothian.
Which is a good place. It's a good way to start, though, right? Like if you're going to start somewhere, let's start with dragons.
Yeah. Every fantasy story starts with dragons. And it talks about them having to essentially go into isolation because of Kragnos, the big centaur god of destruction. And yeah, I thought it was interesting that in the book about Stormcast, the first thing we see at first seems like it has nothing to do with them, unless these dragons come back later.
What are the chances of that?
It'd be super crazy. No, that would never happen.
Nah.
It's rare that we get glimpses. It doesn't never happen, but it's rare that we get glimpses of the realms before Sigmar rolls up. Like this is like, I mean, Age of Myth is more already kind of like a prehistorical time frame. I mean, literally an Age of Myth, tall tales and mythological stories and stuff like that. And so like we're even starting long before even Sigmar rolled up, like with characters that were old when the realms were young, so to speak. And I'm excited to get like glimpses like this of these realms, and it really sort of cements the fact that like Sigmar is a visitor to these places. Like the realms didn't just sort of sprout up because Sigmar had looked at them, but rather he was brought to a place that had persisted and had its own long history at that point. And I don't imagine that we'll spend a lot of time in those eras, but like any glimpses that we can get, I think are treasures, and I'm glad that we get to see them in small snippets like this.
Yeah, I think one of the cool things about this is that it talks about the world not only like existing, but like really having a history well before Sigmar arrives, right? Like people are living and dying, races are rising and getting wiped out. Like it's not like this is the primordial ooze that Sigmar shows up into. Sigmar shows up into a fully formed, constantly evolving realm to begin with. And even the one who rescues him, Dracothian, has already like birthed races of children. Like it's a nice way to tell us that we don't know everything, and that's kind of the point, right? So I particularly enjoyed that a part about it, and also just that, like, what were the underworlds like for Dracothian, right? And for Dragoneth, and for these people that lived in the mortal realms before Sigmar ever got there. Like, it really asks us to almost talk about the evolution of death, the evolution of belief and religion which I understand is a really like kind of deep topic, but like it's something that really fascinates me because I think they've done a really good job of making a living, breathing world. And instead of just having this living, breathing world that rolls forward, it also rolls back. And that's one of my favorite things about Age of Sigmar right now, is that everything is possible. And that's super cool to me.
Yeah, and that's a good call out about death, because like it was Sigmar that found Nagash, and then it was Sigmar that found Gorka Morka, and it was Sigmar that found all these other like major players of the realm. So it's not just the age before him; it's the age before all of the guys that we're thinking of.
Well, and in the old world, we had that, but it was the old ones, and we still know nothing about the old ones. But in the Age of Sigmar, we know who those, paraphrased old ones are, and they're pretty awesome, and they're agents, and they're making cool stuff happen. So that's awesome.
Well, it depends on whose side you are, whether or not they're awesome. But your chaos doesn't think they're awesome. But speaking of which, like it said, it ends up being centuries later after sort of this, Draconith, like the fall of the Draconith Empire, right? It's centuries after that Sigmar comes rolling up. And he's rocketing through the etheric void. He's clinging to the malice and the core of the old world that exploded. Dracothian finds him, takes him to the mortal realms, shows him a whole new world. They fly on a magic carpet. I think I'm mixing that up with something else. That tracks, I think. And like Will said, he goes around finding sort of his old friends / enemies in these realms who have become deified, much like himself. And this is where he starts putting together his pantheon of the gods, and it's this golden era, this age of myth in a very positive spin, optimistic time where the gods are all working together, fostering their own realms and their own civilizations, and everything is hunky dory. Yeah, as I mentioned before, that I love to see stories from the pre-Sigmar. I feel like we could do for some more Age of Myth stories, even after when Sigmar shows up. They talk about how great everything was at this time. I want to know what great looks like. I want to describe to me like the paradise that is the mortal realms at this time, and hopefully one day we'll get that. Did anything else occur in this age that's worth talking about, or any of the stories that they call out in this book on something you guys want to chat about here?
Everything had a little piece of something super cool. Which was something I really enjoyed in this Battletome. It's going to be hard for me to parse out the one story that I really like, because all of them had just little bits that really filled in some of those details we didn't know or had been reminded of before, and that was pretty cool.
Yeah, agreed. I feel like, but with the exception of sort of the insert of the Draconith Empire sort of blurb in this Age of Myth, I think a lot of this stuff generally is stuff that are things that we've heard before, and things that we might have even talked about on the show before as well. How, like I just said, the Pantheon's creation, the civilizations that sort of flourished at the time, and how, and this is me segueing, and how as humanity, or maybe not even humanity, but the mortal races become, more and more established in these realms, and they sort of develop and flourish. That is sort of the entry point, the keyhole for chaos to sort of start weaseling their way into the realms. It's through sort of how do they describe it? It's like the increase of emotions of these people, and in doing so, that's an invitation for chaos to roll up. And no one sees it coming. No one's really prepared for it. But as sort of these civilizations grow, they're just begging to have a target on their backs for chaos to roll up, which is what they do, which then ushers in the age of chaos that we all know and love.
I think there's two interesting points to be made about this specifically. That's fair. You will. Which is that there was war and death and everything before Sigmar showed up. So the arrival of Sigmar didn't, quote, ruin everything, right? Because bad stuff happened before Sigmar was here. But the big thing that wasn't here before Sigmar showed up was there weren't the chaos gods here. So did Sigmar and the gods of the old world actually bring chaos to the mortal realms? And had they not arrived, would the mortal realms never have known chaos?
You can't see, but I've got my fingers on my beard right now. Maybe. Maybe they wouldn't have, like, maybe the societies wouldn't have grown to the degree that they would have been as desirable to chaos, perhaps. Or maybe it was an inevitability. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Fortunately, we never have to know because chaos came. But I'll tell you what, if we ever have to film like a what if series, a la the Marvel's What If, we can pause it and sort of see that through its logical end. What if Sigmar never rolled up to the mortal realms? We're going to trademark that one. That's a great idea. So don't even hands off, audience. Classic TM. But chaos does come heck or high water, and it catches everyone off guard. They strike on. I'm pretty sure you could say all realms, right? Even Azir, I think chaos
Yes,
breaks through, right?
Yeah, not super tough, but enough. Yeah.
Yeah, so because some realms that hit a little harder. I feel like we know this a little bit from the Realm Gate Wars, and that Ghyran was in a rough spot from Nurgle. Actually, from Khorne, Tzeentch was kicking it in Shaman, but that's not to say that. I mean, chaos is sort of swarming all realms at all times, and overwhelming. Overwhelming. Another cool word. Overwhelming. Basically, all the different civilizations in different ways, right?
So the first story we have in the Age of Skies or Age of Chaos is the Burning Skies, and so that's a signal to us that not only is chaos showing up, but the pantheon of order that Sigmar had arranged and worked through is falling apart as well. And we got a cool moment for me, which we'll talk about a little bit later, with the leaders of the Hammers of Sigmar, Bastian Carthalos, in his mortal form, is actually the last person through the gates of Azir when they close in the Age of Chaos. And he actually fights with Sigmar at the head of 12 tribes of humans. So we're getting Sigmar fighting with humans, which I think is the first time that we've had like it spelled out. There's a person, and this person is important, and he's a human, like in the old world where Sigmar led 12 tribes of humans to unite the Empire. And we had a lot of these callbacks where they're tying back the mythos of the Age of Sigmar and tying in reminders of the old world. And I really appreciated that he again fought with 12 human tribes, and this time, instead of uniting, he failed. I thought that was a cool little twist.
Yeah, agreed. So I feel like we've incidentally talked about some of this in different episodes before, but for the sake of completion, I'll say that. So you'd reference the Burning Skies, and so that was this big battle in the Age of Chaos when essentially it was, the forces of order, or like Sigmar and his allies, was their like last stand against the Chaos forces, and things went sideways real quick. I think the turning point, or the most noteworthy thing that occurred in this battle, was that Arcan's, I think Gaunt Summoners, tricked Sigmar into throwing his hammer at nothing into like a portal. And that was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. I mean, this has been like a centuries long like war that is occurring in the mortal realms. And Sigmar's, for all intents and purposes, sort of holding his own with his forces, but the loss of his hammer sort of, I don't know if it spooks him or like, he loses his bravado or what have you, but he realizes that this is a losing battle, and it's high time that I pull up stakes, take my ball, and go home. Oh wait, no, you took my ball, and now I'm going home. And he rolls up to his ear, locks the doors behind him, leaving the realms to their fate. Again, I feel like we've talked about this a lot, but just as a reminder for folks, that's what occurred here.
Well, and I think what we're bypassing here, but also is important, is that we've talked about this a lot because this is a known history that we've had for a while. We kind of knew this from the beginning of Age of Sigmar when they started writing the mythos. And so that's why we've talked about it a lot. But it is one of the foundational things, is that Sigmar himself retreated and gave up the fight, but he didn't give up completely, because he always had this plan to reforge these souls of the dead or the dying into these immortal warriors called Stormcast.
Oh, now I get their names on the book. That makes sense. Now I get it. That's why we're talking about this stuff.
And so one of the little things that I like too is that, again, we have Bastian Carthalos, who has been reforged, is the one who leads the Stormcast or the Azurites to the cleansing of Azir, which I thought was a cool little thing that we actually get characters in action in this era as well.
Yeah, and so kind of what you're talking about, and this is maybe spilled out a little bit in the long wait, is so Sigmar decides, yeah, you know what, there's something I need to do something, and so it's between him and Grungni and Dracothi, and they sort of plan to create this new fighting force, but that's going to take a long time. Like, it's not something they can do immediately. So they're sucking up souls, putting them into suits of armor, yada yada yada. But while this is going on, like, there's also this big campaign to sort of clear out Azir of any sort of taint of chaos, or what have you. They clear out a bunch of orcs and stuff too, so it's not just the chaos stuff.
I'm going to do a call out here for Koros. Yes, beastmen are mentioned in this book. They get slaughtered, and then there's some dragon ogres. They get slaughtered too. So yes, beastmen are mentioned, and they get killed.
It's what they do best. And so they sort of leave the realms. I mean, while there's these big campaigns in sort of Azir, they're the only place that sort of can effectively defend itself, while the rest of the realms are left to their fate for many moons. I can't remember exactly how long the Age of Chaos was, but it wasn't short.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that it's not short.
I'll be the judge of that.
I was not expecting that.
Gotcha.
Help myself. I'm sorry.
Should have known better. But it's not a short period of time, and in almost every other battle tome, it's a large section of a faction's history, except for the Stormcast. In here, it's just them talking about, oh, yep, we closed the door, and now Sigmar is just grabbing people randomly, and he's making Stormcast out of them. But despite how important the Age of Chaos was to the realms as a whole, as important as it was to the mortals of the realms, to Sigmar's Golden Boys, it's it's just the time where they're getting ready, where they are getting ready to actually do something. They were
I don't want to say relaxing, but they were just playing games in the gladiatorium. Like, they didn't even notice that the Age of Chaos was going on.
This is just like summer camp. I mean,
they were just fighting beastmen, and it wasn't anything.
Easy peasy. It's not common that we have a faction that its origins are so relatively deep into the history that is of the mortal realms. Oftentimes, like you said, Will, that Age of Myth or Age of Chaos has a much wider or much more impactful to the faction at hand. But the Stormcast is one of the few, if can't think of any others off the top of my head, but I'm sure they exist. One of the few factions that really come into their own with the Age of Sigmar, or at least at the tail end of Age of Chaos. And by Age of Sigmar, I literally mean the historical age, and less the game system itself. But speaking of which, Age of Sigmar, eventually the Stormcast get tired of beating up each other and beastmen, basically just those two things in Azir, and they decide, let's bring the fight. We've grinded the low level mobs to get experience, and so now that we can actually go and tackle the actual enemies that we need to fight, and thus the lightning strikes across the realms. Sigmar's Golden Boys march in unison, Liberator shields in lockstep, and the Realm Gate Wars begins, and we've entered the Age of Sigmar. I've just declared it. Did anything jump out at you guys here? Anything worth talking about? I assume anything worth talking about in the Age of Sigmar. What were some of your favorite parts of this here age?
So one thing that we've kind of mentioned but hadn't really talked about is the fact that the Stormcast, they die and they get reforged. They are essentially immortal. They live, they die, they live again. Shiny and chrome. But one thing I wanted to call out.
I was muted, but I was laughing.
Oh, good. My heart. But I wanted to call out the Spire of the Lost, where as nearly immortal as these warriors are, they're not actually immortal, and some of them are lost permanently. Mm-hmm. And it is something that they are still aware of. But it doesn't stop them from, picking up the hammer, picking up the shield, and riding a bolt of lightning down to fight again.
This book does a really good job of telling us that there's a cost to being a Stormcast. Before, to me, it seemed a lot more of like, oh, there's this problem. That is a problem, but it's not really a big deal yet. But it's going to be a big deal at some point. And I feel like we're starting to see some of that cost in the narrative, which I really appreciate. The other reason why, it's kind of hard to pick out some of these early ones is that the Mortal Realms podcast has actually done a lot of these stories in our early episodes, because this is where the narrative started. And the Age of Sigmar, because it is a moving narrative, we've moved from this time to this time to this time. In a lot of these stories, the Black Rift of Claxis, the Heldenhammer Crusade, even the Seasons of War are things that we have played through, read through in Age of Sigmar from the 6 years since GW has released the game. So one of the things that I really appreciated was the bonds of patronage. The Bonds of Patronage is a cool little story about a Stormcast who remembers who he was, and he goes back and he finds his civilization and basically brings it back to life before sacrificing himself in its defense again. So he kind of abandons the Stormcast for the sake of his memory. And I thought that was cool to have a story like that, because we haven't really seen that before that I know of. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that was a cool one. Paul, you bring up a good point in that the early days of the Age of Sigmar are very focused on sort of the Realm Gate Wars, and the Realm Gate Wars is very much a Stormcast Eternals focused, series of events, so on and so forth, and that like they're just inextricably linked. The one is the other, so to speak. And to your point, yeah, the Mortal Realms actually, when it was first started, long before you or I or any of us were on it, Eric and Davy did talk about a lot of these Realm Gate Wars, larger, campaign level like events that were going on. It was very interesting. I remember telling them when they first started that I really liked their coverage, but it was too long. And oh man, if only I would have known how things were going to go. I'm a little embarrassed to admit that, because who could sit and listen to a podcast for that long? To that end, a lot of the stories that they focus in this Battletome, in this era, are references or reminders to what had occurred in those Realm Gate Wars. And so, for you listeners, instead of us rehashing those, I would recommend you go back to some of the very, very early episodes of the Mortal Realms and catch yourself back up on what was going on back then in the Realm Gate Wars. This was long before any of us really knew how to edit anything, if I remember correctly. So I apologize for that as well. Back to the Age of Sigmar. Another thing you'd called out, Paul, I'm sorry, I'm just going to keep talking, is that you'd reference sort of the Black Rift of Claxis. And there's a few other stories here that I was surprised to see these little blurbs referencing purely Black Library stories. That I find that to be a rarity, and sort of they often have a little bit of a wall between, what do they call it, like the studio publications and like the Black Library publications. Often they're talking about similar stuff, but like rarely do the two ever sort of meet. And so this caught me off guard a little bit when they start talking about the Black Rift of Claxis. I'm like, wait a sec, was that in a studio book? I don't think so. I think it was just a series written by my best friend and best friend of the show, Josh Reynolds. But lo and behold, it was sort of purely that Black Library introduction. So I love seeing stuff like that. The only reason I bring it up is because I wish there was more of a connection between sort of the official, studio-based publications and this Black Library to really cement the fact that they are in the same universes. They're telling the same stories, and that the things that occur in one do matter in the other. And so I was just happy to see that here. And the Black Rift of Claxis is a great little series of short stories that end up being one much longer novel, and I recommend folks check it out.
Absolutely.
Did any of the stories in here grab you, Will? Anything else jump out at you?
Well, because I guess I don't, since there was never an episode about this before, I don't know of whether or not they talked about the realms like Hish, like they do in that story, and because there's gang features in there, so we're almost circling back to older periods of time and fleshing out more of the realms that we wouldn't have seen because the Realm Gate Wars really focused on Akshi and Gairan. So I kind of like that we're not just adding things on to the end of the timeline, but we're fleshing things out in the timelines we've already gone over.
Yeah, and I love when they do that. And it's Games Workshop as a whole do such a great job about leaving those spaces that allow them to go back and fill it in. Like they know enough to leave enough room to breathe so that they can continually fill out that timeline as they go forward. So like you said, it's not always tacking stuff onto the end or like throwing stuff in the beginning, but filling in the sort of that ever-growing middle is always a delight, because you can always call back and be like, oh yeah, no, I know that place now, and it's how does that sort of tie into what I knew about the timeline back then, which is great. So as we mentioned, we sort of covered the Realm Gate Wars before, but after that is kind of I don't know, I don't want to say it's a more peaceful time, because it's definitely, there's never a peaceful time in the Age of Sigmar, but once the forces of order, Sigmar's forces, are able to claim a few of those realm gates that lead into the 8 points, they've locked a few down, yada, yada, yada. They feel confident that they're able to expand further into the realms. And in doing so, we sort of enter this realm, this time frame of what do they call it? The Seasons of War, where Sigmar starts, or, the forces of order start finding and founding cities in the realms. And so it's these seeds of hope that they start with, but there's a whole bunch of, other cities that we learn about later. And it's a time for expansion. It's a time for order to really, plant their flags in the ground and retake back some of the realms from chaos, and then also death, and then also destruction as well. And it really seems like things are turning around for the forces of order, and it's these Stormcasts that really have turned the tide against chaos, and it seems like the pendulum's swinging the other way. But I think we can then fast forward to a hitch in Sigmar's plan, so to speak, or something that no one saw coming, except for the Bone Daddy himself, is when we entered the time of tribulations. A new sort of era. It doesn't have an age of in front of it, but it could be considered as such. Who wants to talk about what's going on in the time of tribulations in the Soul Wars time frame for the Stormcast?
Well, what we're talking about here is Nagash building another Black Pyramid. It seems to be his game, and he built this one so it's upside down instead of right side up.
See, he's always mixing it up.
Yes, he's mixing it up because he built it downwards instead of upwards this time.
That was his problem before.
And he does this great ritual, and it took him thousands of years to build it, and it buries itself into the realm and draws all the magic of Shyish to the center of the realm, as opposed to the normal way that it works, which is drawing it to the outside of the realm. And one of the consequences of this ritual is that the undead start rising in all of the realms, and magic goes absolutely bananas in the Arcanum Optimar. And so we start through here, and this is kind of right before the last big thing we had with Broken Realms. So it's kind of our, what is this? 3 to 5 years ago, during when Games Workshop has been a thing, or Age of Sigmar has been a thing, is when this timeline is happening. So the Malign Portents, all this kind of stuff happened at this moment in time. So it's a really cool way of moving the timeline forward, and also giving us some new races like the Night Haunt.
Yeah, absolutely. And so as far as speaking generally, as far as it relates to the Stormcast, right? So all across the mortal realms, different races were having different portents, which is what they call it, malign portents, that something nefarious was up and something nefarious was coming. And so on the Stormcast front, we had some Stormcast. I think Vandus Hammerhand was starting to have some premonitions that something was going down. I think a lot of the Lord Ordinators were, through their orreries and their weird telescopes, were predicting that there was some terrible calamity that was going to befall Shyish. And so there's this big force of, this big alliance of, an order Order folks marching on Shyish to sort of stop Nagash, what he was up to. As we find out, it's this inverted pyramid that he's putting together. They're battling other forces that have also come to, everyone is sort of pulled to the same spot in Shyish. There's, chaos forces, destruction forces. There's this big battle, but no one's able to stop Nagash from, enacting his great plan. And it turns out that Nagash is basically ticked at everybody at this point. That's the whole reason he's always been sort of a power hungry monster, but he especially has a bone to pick with Sigmar. And so he's doing this great, ritual so that he can gain all the power of Shyish and sort of strike back against the world, Sigmar specifically, for a number of reasons. One, he thinks he's stealing the souls that rightfully belong to Nagash because all are in Nagash. They've had a beef ever since the Age of Chaos in that they each thought they were betraying each other when, sort of in the tail end of Age of Chaos. So there's been that feud since then as well. And so all of this comes to a head with Nagash's big plan. Of course, it falls apart for a hot second. If you want to learn more, listen to any of our Soul Wars episodes. This is sort of the genesis of the Night Haunt, as Paul said, and he sort of sends those out against the realms, so to speak, tearing down and attacking sort of that civilization, that fledgling civilization that Sigmar is sort of trying to foster in the mortal realms. And it's been a nightmare, let me tell you.
Yeah, and Sigmar responds. He responds by sending out the Sacrosanct Chambers. He's had this, like, a whole other army of Stormcast just sort of sitting around trying to fix the issues with the reforging, because, the Stormcast that die, they lose a little bit of themselves each time. And there's been this entire army working on fixing that, and now they're not doing that anymore. Now they're fighting ghosts.
So what would you rather be doing now?
Right, yeah.
So that's one of the other things about the Stormcast that's super unique, is that when Age of Sigmar dropped, we got the Liberators and we got the Judicators. And then when Soul Wars dropped, which was a new box set, we got the Sacrosanct Chamber. This is the race that has the most model evidence of what has been going on in the realms, because we got new models that look different for pretty much every major era of the game. And so when Will's talking about the Sacrosancts, we got literally, to be kind of blunt with it, they're basically the IT guys who are trying to fix out what's going on. But in Age of Sigmar, they're mages who are trying to figure out what's going on, that get sent down into the realms to fight. And these are the guys, if you have seen them, they're the guys with the robes. We also had the Vanguard Hunters come, where Aaron was talking about that he was putting together the box set with Nurgle. They came down in that box set. So we have these marks on the models of the different stories that happened from time to time. And we're going to have a couple more coming up in a minute. So it's kind of cool to go back and relive these moments, because you also can see which models were fighting, and some of these characters were there from the very beginning. Some of them move in as we move along. And it's a cool way of telling a story. And also, it's hard sometimes to parse back to what model was released when and why that was cool. And doing all of the Stormcast right now, I think this is the 4th or the 5th Battletome, 6 years in, leads to kind of a cool story, not only in the narrative, but also in the physical release of the models when it comes to Stormcast. So I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, very cool. So I'll pause and say, do you guys have any stories from this era that you guys want to talk about before we sort of push our timeline forward a little bit? Anything jump out at you?
One of the stories that I really liked in this era is called The Purest Excellence. And it's about a Lord Celestant who is fighting against the Slaaneshi host in Zintel. So this is in Hysh. And turns out that one of the warlords of this force is actually her son. And she doesn't want to kill him. Obviously, she remembers who he is. As a Stormcast, you keep some of those memories. And so she goes to fight him, but then stalls at the last moment, and he strikes her down. And then she gets reforged, comes back, stalls at the last minute over and over. And then finally, they're able to restrain her son so she can finally have this conversation and allow him to, come back to order. And instead she slays him because she's forgotten who he is, which I just thought was,
I can't fight this guy. He's my son.
yeah, which I thought was like super depressing, but also like super flavorful narrative for the Stormcast. So I love that one.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah.
Will, it sounded like you got one.
Yeah, I do. So the one I want to talk about is called Frozen Lightning, which is just a cool sounding name off the bat. But it's a story of those Vanguard hunters, the more scout-like of the heavily armored soldiers of Sigmar, like crawling their way through a storm and just opening fire on a bunch of ogres. And we have Indrasta, who is a brand new character, like arriving to the battle and saving everyone. But the reason I thought this was a cool story is she's a new character for us outside of like the game, but like it was a recent model that came out with Dominion and the Era of Beast, what we're going to talk about later. So it's them weaving these new characters into the history of this faction. She's not just a new person. She's been here. We just haven't come across any stories with her yet.
Convenient.
Yeah. And also, it's a story where I can't envision what this character looks like because her model has her wearing the newest armor with the newest gear, but the story takes place before then. So I'm like, what does she look like? What is she wearing?
Oh, good point. I didn't really thought about that. Yeah, that's a good thought. Yeah, especially with her. Like, did she always have? Well, we'll get into her. Did she always have like the angel wings? I think she did.
Oh yeah, she always had the wings.
So then, like, how does that like fit with her big, bulky like armor, like her little tiny wings? And they're not tiny, but like smaller than what you'd think wings. With her big bulky armor. Yeah, interesting. So this story I'll talk about, I guess, moves the story forward a little bit. Is that the Necroquake? If we're going to talk about how the Soul Wars time frame affected Sigmar, it turns out that the Necroquake had wide-reaching effects in the realms. And one of the things it did is it actually disrupted some protections that Sigmar had placed over these vaults that he'd sort of scattered around the mortal realms. In these vaults, he had stored weapons or individuals or artifacts that he thought were too powerful to sort of let roam the mortal realms, but at the same time, he couldn't destroy him either. And so he had hid them away in the realms and then used these I can't remember, forget engines, whatever they're called, penumbral engines, to sort of hide their
engines. I love
forget engines.
To hide them from anyone else, stumbling across them. It's a whole thing. Listen to our Forbidden Power episode. Forbidden Power? I think Forbidden Power. Turns out the Necroquake disrupted those protections, and then all of a sudden these vaults were like sort of findable, discoverable by anybody who was looking for them. Turns out the Night Haunt, led by the Mortarch Lady Olinder, books it towards this one in Lethis. Again, we talked about this in at Swords or at Forbidden Power, but yada yada yada. They slice through a whole bunch of the Stormcast. They kill essentially kill the Celestin Prime, and they free Catacross. We don't know it's Catacross at the time, but we find it later, from this vault, which then sort of kicks off the introduction of the Bone Reapers into the realms. And so it was this sort of thing that like Sigmar was hiding and protecting this mighty general in a storm vault that the Necroquake sort of released this great evil onto the world. And yet another enemy, yet another force that then the Stormcast have to contend with in the mortal realms. They keep adding up, guys. That's the last thing you needed was another enemy,
right?
So that's obviously a big milestone in the mortal realms as it relates to our golden boys. Here we go. So the sort of Soul Wars time frame, time of tribulations, seems like it goes on forever in real life. Maybe that's just me, but eventually events conspire to bring it to a close. And that is sort of what we find in the Broken Realms stories. Again, if you want to find out more about Broken Realms, listen to our Broken Realms episodes. But we can sort of fast forward through them a little bit. It's a shorter time frame. Basically, it's the final days of the Soul Wars. Did any of the stories here jump out at you guys that you guys want to chat about?
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about Marathi Kane, a former member of Sigmar's Pantheon, stabs him in the back with a 1-2 punch.
Which is the worst place to get stabbed.
Yeah, and punching is the worst way to stab someone.
Stab punch.
No, she convinces Sigmar to go on like a joint mission to the 8 points, like the strongest bastion of chaos, and then sneaks away and like leaves all of his soldiers there to die and to be permanently trapped by chaos. And then she takes the power she stole and then steals one of his cities and takes like his soldiers captive so they can't escape. And really just like, and it's something that's going to come up a little bit later, but showing how one of his own would-be allies is kind of poking and prodding at the fact that they are immortal and doing everything she can to try and overcome or find a loophole around that.
With friends like these, who needs enemies?
Yeah.
So this is a cool moment for me because, as Will was just saying, Marathi takes Anvilgard, which is now Harkuran, right? And then this ties in at this moment in time. It's a different place in the Battletome, but it ties in right here. Is that Sigmar is like super angry that Marathi has taken one of his cities of Sigmar and apparently has massed an army to go take it back before he realizes that Kragnos is going to go take out Excelsis. And Sigmar trades Anvilgard for Marathi's help with Excelsis, which I don't know that we necessarily knew that before. But it specifically says, well, if you come help me save this city, I'll ignore the other one. Which is like, to me, is like a massive lore big thing that Sigmar literally just lets an entire city go to Marathi in the hopes of saving Excelsis. So that was a cool little piece of lore that really triggered my narrative brain.
It's like that, I don't know, that offer meme where like I offer your city that you own already, and you get my help to keep another city safe. It's wild, and I don't think that we've seen the end of that sort of conflict as to what arose from there. Or let me clarify: I hope we haven't seen the end of that conflict, because otherwise, I feel like that's kind of a dangling story point that needs to be resolved. Another story from this time frame is as we've talked about in the Broken Realms Be'lakor book, but how Be'lakor enacts this great plan to corrupt the skies of Shaman, thus preventing any Stormcast killed under this cloud from reforging and rolling back to Azir. We thought it was going to be this whole thing. Turns out it wasn't really. But for a while there, things looked really dire and desperate for the Stormcast in Shaman. There's this story called A Terminal Line that talks about that a little bit, and it sort of recaps what had occurred there in Broken Realms Be'lakor, but it adds a little a spin on it that I hadn't heard before. But the Stormcast are sort of aghast and appalled by what's occurring there, knowing that like, oh no, we could get trapped and have our souls stolen. It's obviously it would give any Stormcast pause to want to fight there. However, who it doesn't give pause to are the Redeemed. And that is those Stormcast who originally were corrupted by chaos, were converted, for lack of a better word, converted via hammer by the Celestia Prime to then be reforged into Stormcast themselves, led by Tornus the Redeemed, a great name for what he is. He leads his fellow sort of reforged, reclaimed Stormcast in an attempt to brave that chaos storm and to throw down chaotic idols and instead erect monuments and things honoring those Stormcast that had fallen under the storm. How cool is that? Like that, like a whole Sigmarine Brotherhood storm host was eradicated under the storm and basically wiped out because they weren't able to be reforged. But despite that, our boy Tornus rolls up with his A team to kick chaos butt, erect statues honoring the fallen Stormcast, and get the heck up out of there. I thought that was super cool, and I like how they're continually trying to find ways to reintroduce Tornus and show that like he's still here and like he's still doing great things and he's still trying to earn his keep. Not literally storm keep, that's a different thing. With the Stormcast.
But also he's not the only one, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, he has a brotherhood of other redeemed. Like this is a thing we are going to keep seeing going forward. And
furthermore, a lot of the Stormcast are side-eyeing him constantly, thinking that that he's suspicious and that they shouldn't trust him. None of those Stormcast are rolling up trying to honor the fallen, but rather it's these people essentially that have something, or these Stormcast that have something to prove, are the only ones who roll up to sort of do the right thing, which speaks to their bravery.
Yep.
Yeah, and one thing I really like about that story is, like, it says that there's a wave of horror that engulfs Azir and like the Stormcast. Like, they are legitimately afraid. They've been told they're eternal and that there's like a cost to it, but they'll keep on fighting. And when they find out that they can just be annihilated, it's enough to hit the morale. But then they still keep fighting. Like, they're not just brave because they're immortal. They're immortal because they're brave. That's why they were chosen.
Man, put that on a bumper sticker. So that's good. Write that down. Drop the mic.
One of our questions from our Discord from Bossaru is, how does the storm of chaos affect Stormcast? Like, we talked about two things right there. But the other thing is that when Stormcast get killed, right, when they just corporate, there apparently is a finite amount of time when it is considered safe for them to get back. Like, the actual I die, I get reforged, like, there is a limit. There is a cost to not immediately going back. And that leads to, like, they're talking about this entire host is lost, is considered gone. When Tornus goes down to erect these statues, he doesn't go down to rescue them, because nobody thinks they can be rescued. They have all just become these lightning geists that are completely uncontrollable. They cannot be caught. They cannot be hurted, right? Like, this is the first time where we have something just destroy the actual essence en masse. We've had individual Stormcasts get destroyed before, and we have other forces that keep the lightning geists or the souls. If, for example, in the Chaos War Altars or the Night Haunt have their leaders that can trap people in the locks. But this is the first time that we've actually had something that literally just scatters them and causes them to be no longer available. Like, you can't be reforged. You can't be caught. We just don't know. You're gone. So that definitely does affect the Stormcast for sure. Like, they're at the moment narratively, we've only lost a chapter that was introduced and then kind of wiped out relatively early on. I'm sorry, a chamber. Sorry, a chamber.
Remember, I said we can't use Sigmarines anymore. That was I said it, but that was the last time anyone could ever use it again.
Sorry, I didn't use it.
Yeah.
I know I had just spoken, or I had praised Tornus, but now I'm wondering if, like, part of him showing up is like, he's like, I already know, like, how bad chaos is. It's no big deal, guys. There's nothing to be afraid of. Let me show you. Maybe he's not brave. Maybe he just thinks it's like he's been there, done that kind of thing. It's tough to say. So that's one tidbit from the Broken Realms. As we spend more time, or I mean, again, we covered these at length in the previous episode, so I don't want to dig too much deeper. I think we could probably jump forward to the Siege of Excelsis. I think we had brought that up earlier. Again, listen to the Kragnos episode if you want more. But Sigmar's cities are getting sieged every which way, right? And the Excelsis is no exception. Kragnos busts his way out of a mountain. He runs across a continent. He's coming to knock down some walls, and it requires all sorts of allies.
It's like Donkey Kong, but with four legs instead of
essentially. But Sigmar has to call in favors that he doesn't want to have to call in order to save the city. And of course, it's left on its last legs, facing down Kragnos, and it's through trickery and treachery. Treachery is a word I just made up. In order to save it. That's essentially bringing the end of that Broken Realms time frame and ushering in the Age of Beasts with Kragnos being released onto the realms. Awesome. Let's jump right in with another question from Bosseru. He had a couple. Thank you, Bosseru, from the Discord. And as Paul mentioned earlier, if you want to ask questions on this show, one way to do so is to hang out in the Discord all the time, in all waking hours, never go to sleep. And then one day I'll ask, hey, does anybody have any questions for the show? And then you can ask him. He asks, is the Age of the Beast, which is what we're going to talk about now, hitting the Stormies in any less than direct ways? Well, let me rephrase that. Is it hitting the Stormies in direct ways first, and then we can talk about the indirect ways? What's going on in the Age of Beasts?
Like, the fact that it's the Age of Beasts itself doesn't really have like a direct effect on the Stormcast, because the major effect that's really something they need to struggle with is that the Cursed Skies. Everything else is just kind of more of the same until Grungni shows up.
Dun, dun,
Dun, dun, dun. Which, if you recall, all the way back at the beginning of the episode, we mentioned how Grungni was one of the people that helped Sigmar create the Stormcast and do the forgings, and he shows back up with super cool new Thunderstrike armor, which allows them to ignore the Cursed Skies most of the time.
So if they're all wearing Thunderstrike armor, do they all have Thunder Vision now?
I don't see why not.
So it's interesting because it is a dire situation as a whole. Kragnos is out there. We have these brand new cool Oryx, or cruel Oryx, depending on your point of view.
Can't it be both?
Exactly. And we have all these new dangers, but the Stormcast themselves, there's no direct effect for it being the Age of Beasts.
This is essentially true.
There is actually something we haven't talked about that is a massive section of the book that we probably could talk about a little bit later, is that the way that it's been affected by the Age of Beasts is actually these Dawnbringer Crusades.
Yep.
Which is a whole massive thing to talk about. But functionally, what that means is instead of going out and fighting in a bunch of Stormcast-centric forces, there have been a lot of examples where they're actually the minority in a mass of people from the cities of Sigmar, humans and devoted and elves and Dwarden, going out to resettle the realms. So I think that the less than direct ways is that the Stormcast aren't really acting like Stormcast traditionally that we would think of them. They, in rules terms, they can still be fielded as their own force, but narratively, they really have been hit super hard by this Cursed Skies. It mentions that a lot of the chambers are half strength. A lot of them have lost a lot of people, and how these brotherhoods that they have are meant to replace family at this point. Like it really has become something that is completely fundamentally changed the way that they work. So it's a big deal, but not specifically because of the Age of Beasts, but just because of the consequences of what's happened in the narrative and how the Age of Beasts has caused a fallout in the way that they work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and then another change that comes of that is, like, Kragnos is back, and Kragnos is part of the very first story we talked about. So he's not going to come back alone. The dragons are going to come back in response. So, the Stormcast actually get some more friends. And so the two Draconiths come back and they forge an alliance with the Stormcast. And now we have even more draconic creatures working with the Stormcast. We've got the Dracoths that came early on. We now have the Draconith. We have the Star Drakes. We had the Dracolines. We have the Dracotigers, probably.
I feel like you're messing with me now.
No, there's Dracobears.
I've seen them. I saw them.
He's out there.
Yeah.
Those Dracogryphs are pretty cuddly, though.
Yeah.
So I feel like in answering or not answering Bostru's question, I think we've touched on maybe three big hallmarks of the Age of Beasts, or rather the sort of new things that are occurring that sort of came with this Age of Sigmar 3.0 and you know, it's synonymous with the Age of Beasts, and that we've talked about we've mentioned the Thunderstrike armor, we've mentioned the Dawnbringer Crusades, and we've mentioned sort of the alliance. What is the what's the alliance called for the dragons? The Pact
Draconis.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. So those are three big, you know, tentpole sort of events that have occurred in this era. And coincidentally enough, folks have asked us different questions about each of those topics. And so I would be remiss if I didn't bring those up, and we can tackle them one by one. We've generally talked to them, but maybe we can deep dive into some of them. So back to a Bostru question. He asked, did Grugny showing back up change how Stormcast work? I think Paul was touching on that a little bit. Mm-hmm. One other change that I think I noticed that came with sort of this, you know, Thunderstrike armor, upgrade that the Stormcast are getting is that, Paul, you had mentioned that they're sort of at half strength, and mm-hmm. a lot of the Stormhosts and chambers and things aren't running at their full capacity. Because of that, we're seeing a lot of accelerating of the classic reforging process. And so they're really just, you're getting a Stormcast rolling up. They're going to slam them on the Anvil of Apotheosis and kick them back out to the realms faster than they normally would, because they're at, they're such a diminished strength currently. And so although they've got this, power upgrade in their armor, not everybody has it. And when people are getting reforged, which they're still doing because they're able to, because of their Thunderstrike armor, they're able to rocket through the cursed skies. They're sending them right back down, sort of not taking the care with these with the souls of these Stormcasts, and we don't know what that means yet. Like, we haven't seen the ramifications yet, but I doubt it's going to be good. So that's yet another change that we're seeing in the Stormcast.
They did mention that fighting in the Gladiatorium seems to be a way of lessening the trauma or dealing with the trauma of being reforged.
Classic Fight Club.
They're skipping.
Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have talked about it.
No. Sure. So yeah, they are cycling through super fast. They are skipping, going to the Gladiatorium. One of the other things I don't think that we've mentioned yet is that they are burning out these Stormcast souls. Not only do we have this like monument in the Sigmarabulum that lists the names of those who are gone, but we now have mention of Stormcast who can no longer be reforged, willingly giving of themselves to create these things called star bridges that are in the storm keeps now. And so Will had noticed this first. Do you want to talk about the star bridges?
Yeah. So the thing that's really got me about the star bridges, like you said, that they are powered by the souls of Stormcast. And it says that the souls of Stormcast reforged too many times is just one of the sources. Mm-hmm. I'm horrified to think of like the other souls that they're using to power these things.
Yeah.
But what they're doing is creating a direct link back to Azir. So we have the Cursed Skies and we have Thunderstrike armor where people can punch through. Mm-hmm. But if you don't have that armor, in order for your soul not to get caught, you better hope that you're near one of the major cities with these star bridges so your soul can get back. But then, just like what you just said, they're not sticking near the cities. They're leading these expeditions further out.
So what I'm hearing is that if you're a normal Stormcast army, you're on Wi-Fi. But if you've got Stormstrike armor, you're at 5G. But if you're near one of these star bridgers, you've got a landline and you are like good to go. But like I know it's a joke, but also that actually seems to be the way that it's working at this point.
Yeah.
is that there is spotty reception. You may not get back if you're not in Thunderstrike armor. If you are in Thunderstrike armor, you've got a pretty good chance of being able to home in and get back to the reforging. But again, these star bridges are this brand new thing that apparently is necessary, and they collect souls from a specific area to assist. It's yeah. There are problems. The play out of this is that there are problems with the Stormcast right now, and they are throwing in as many fixes as they can to try and make it work. But it's obvious that there is a big issue that is not working, and that is the flaw in the reforging. Right? Everything is like, oh, there's this flaw. We're working on it. Oh, there's this flaw. We're working on it. Grungy's like, there's this flaw. I was working on it. Still couldn't figure it out. But here, I'll make you this cool new armor. Right? Like, everybody is trying to figure out what's going on. And there's even a crusade of the Stormcast into Shyish trying to figure out. And one of the other stories was about one character in specific who's convinced that if she can die often enough, that she will finally have a memory that she thinks can help with the reforging that will finally come to the surface. Like bad things are happening. and there's going to be some consequence, one would think, eventually to this haste and this forced recycling. So that's a cool thread to pick up.
I think everything's going to be fine. I don't know what you guys are worried about.
Yeah.
And this, actually, I didn't know that we were going to go as deep into this as we were, because this also ties into a question that Klaus, M.A., patron of the Mortal Realms, just as an aside, hey guys, if you want to be a patron of the Mortal Realms, and then when I read your question, I will lead with patron, yada yada, whatever your name is. You can head on over to themortalrealms.com/Patreon and join up there. Or I think you can go to patreon.com/themortalrealms. Either one, take your pick, and become a patron there, and you'll get that fun title that I just gave Klaus. Anyways, he had asked something that we just talked about, so I want to make sure that we bring up his question, and that he said this Stormcast Eternal were the saving grace and heralded as the dawn of Age of Sigmar. Pun intended, as per company policy. Thank you. Your check's in the mail. We then find out that they were flawed, if not on the battlefield, but then in the lore. The reforging was a way to counter the endless forces of chaos, but now chaos has foiled their competitive advantage with the cursed skies. What price are Stormcast Eternals paying for overcoming that challenge? I think we just talked about that price. Sorry, we did it out of order. We should ask the question first. And then he had a follow-up question that we could probably bring up now. Are they still the main threat to chaos? Well, maybe that's a bigger topic. Maybe we put a pin in that. You guys think about it, and we'll circle back once we get through the timeline. Are they still the main threat to chaos? We'll see. Maybe the answer will reveal itself.
The answer will shock you.
Yeah.
Shock me. So I had mentioned that there were 3 topics that we were going to talk about in the Age of Beast. We just talked about the Thunderstrike armor and all that it comes with. Also, let's look at some of the dragon stuff here. Darth Alec, who's asked a lot of questions this episode. Get ready, audience. He asked thoughts on the Dragon Seraphon Stormcast Triple Alliance. What do we think about that? What are our takes?
I am a fan. This cool Triple Alliance, this cool Pact Draconis, it's what got me to go, well, maybe Stormcast actually are cool again, and it's why I'm painting a Stormcast currently. But I think it's just like a cool Age of Sigmar twist on the classic idea of like a knight and a dragon. Like it's a concept as old as fantasy, but when you look at it through the lens of Age of, like, it's inherently Age of Sigmar in the way that they're sort of implementing it with these knights, and they're tying it into Dracothian, and that connection has existed even before we knew the Draconith were there, that Dracothian and Sigmar were had that linkage since they found each other. And I just like that it's an expansion on a lot of the themes that we've seen before.
Very cool. Paul, what do you think?
I think what Darth Alec is also trying to say is that wouldn't it make sense if the Draconith and the Dracoths and Dracothian all were the same thing, or were somehow in it together? And I don't think that, because GW first and foremost is a models company and a rules company and narrative company second. and the models don't look similar enough to me to say that they all should be the same. And I like that even the mounts, even, these special characters get their own agency, have their own story and their own way of working that can create the narrative. So I'm always going to be appreciative of that in addition to it, because obviously with the Stormcast, the closest you can come to is, well, we have these redeemed and it's kind of weird to work with them. But we're all have sparks of Sigmar in our souls and we're all fighting this war. So having a civil war between Stormcast is not something we're really going to be able to do. But with these Dracoths and these Star Drakes and this tension with Dracothian and the Dragoneth, like it actually, I think it adds a little bit more interest to the Battletome and the forces themselves, because they are allowed to have some like infighting, some actual like grudges against each other, and I think that's kind of cool.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna take a step back and I'll say, let's maybe even describe how this Pact Draconis came to be. You'll recall, I think we did a flashback in the Cragnus episode about how, just like that. The Dragoneth were this ancient race of dragons. Like we said, it was like the first story in our timeline here, pre-Sigmar visiting not visiting, rolling up on the mortal realms. Kragnos basically destroyed them as much as something can be destroyed, leaving like the two princes alive, and he's going on a mission to smash all their eggs. The Dragoneth see the writings on the wall. They can't stand against this dude who's becoming quickly a god, and they make a deal with this land to save their eggs, so that Kragnos can't smash them all up, and then the two princes go into hiding. I don't know where they went, but they were gone. So then flash forward to the present day, we realize, oh no, Kragnos is back. He kicked his way out of a mountain. The Dragoneth, they call out to this. I mean, I don't know how do they get a hold of this line? I can't remember, but they say, hey, look, now's the time. We're going to start hatching our eggs. We're going to release the race back into the world, and we're going to ally with the Stormcast, which is what this Pact Draconis is. Man, I really glossed over how that worked, but I think I got the main points right.
But I think this is actually a problem with this Battletome, not because anything is wrong with the Battletome, but there is so much history that has been created for Age of Sigmar. And this is actually something that I've thought about this Battletome in general, is that we can't actually cover every little bit in this Battletome. Nope. There is so much new stuff. There is so much clarified stuff. There is so much just stuff, right? So much lore that ties into all these other awesome stories and all these other episodes. I know we've been talking about like, oh, hey, if you want to hear about that, go talk to this episode. Because as I said at the top, like the actual narrative itself is a massive chunk of fiction. And it's really hard to encompass everything, because we're literally telling the entire story of Age of Sigmar in the last 6 years in order to recap what the Stormcast Eternals are, where they have come from, and what we think is going to happen. And I think it's the first time I've ever read an army book, a codex, or a Battletome where it feels a little overwhelming to try and summarize everything in a way that makes sense, because it is so much information and there are so many things that are cool and amazing. And it's not possible to have that much time to go through all the little ideas. So I think you did a great job, Aaron, but I also thought it was just a great moment to bring up like that's actually a problem with the Battletome. Like if you have one Battletome that you're like, I'm listening to the episode and it's super cool, but I'm wondering if there's anything different or fun in the Battletome we didn't cover. Like this is the Battletome to buy, because there is so much content. It's awesome.
Everything I do is a great job. To echo what you said, the history of the Stormcast is the history of the Age of Sigmar. Essentially, they're intertwined and inextricable. In terms of thoughts of how the triple alliance of the Dragon, Seraphon, and Stormcast was, I'll start with models are awesome. I love the models. They're probably the best models in the new range. I can't get enough of them. They're fantastic. I did not care for the story for almost the exact opposite reasons that Paul liked it. I'm trying to even call back to what you just said, but I remember shaking my head at most of the things you said. I wish there was a better way to get those models into the range than the way they describe it here. It seems I don't. It's a classic. No, these things always existed, and here's this not very convincing reason as to why they always existed. The demigryphs were in the forest all along, kind of thing. And so I didn't necessarily care for it, but I'm not going to be a bummer about it, so I'm not going to dwell too much on it. Plus, the models are so great that I'm willing to forgive some measure of dissatisfaction. Third topic, Age of Beasts, is this Dawnbringer Crusades. We touched on him a little bit. Countess Ellis Neonet asks, are there any more interesting Dawnbringer Crusade details in the Battletome? Did you learn anything about the Dawnbringer Crusades in this here tome?
Yeah.
And if so, tell me about it.
So there was something that I read in one of the beginning section that I thought was just super awesome. They're talking about how they have a book of Vandus that they read in the Sigmarite churches and the martyrdom of Jakdos. They read these readings, and then in Hallowheart's Grand Conclave is filled with sculpture by elven master artists. They have Stations of the Blessed Iron in Vindikarum, I think. So they've actually pulled out the narrative more to make unique, quote, relics, to make different of cities of Sigmar as these pilgrimage sites. So it's not just like, oh, Sigmar says we should do these things, so therefore we go and do it. Like, there's actually reasons for moving between these different cities of Sigmar. There's actually treasures that are unique to that city that they are defending. This book did a really good job, in my mind, of detailing why the average person living in the realms would care that Sigmar wants these things to happen, right? They're creating far more of an in-depth understanding of what living in underneath Sigmar means to the average person, which to me really reinforces why you would go on a crusade to go and found new nexus points and to go and start new cities, right? So that was super cool. There are a ton of there's a ton of detail just describing what exactly is a Dawnbringer Crusade, who exactly is a part of the Dawnbringer Crusade, where do the Dawnbringer Crusades go to, which parts of the Stormcast actually, facilitate that. So the Vanguard the Vanguard chamber actually apparently is the thing that goes out and finds these nexuses. They actually go and find these places of power and then direct where the Crusades should go. So it's not just a simple point and shoot. There's this whole background that they're creating around why we're going here, why we would know the area, all that kind of thing. So there is a ton about the Dawnbringer Crusades in here. It's definitely worth a read.
Right on. Will, did you learn anything about the Dawnbringer Crusades that you didn't know?
Not really much outside of like what either Paul had mentioned or just like the Stormcast's role in these Dawnbringer Crusades. And this might just be like my own misconception from reading the core rulebook, but I had always envisioned that like it was not just primarily mortals, but that many of them were almost exclusively being led by mortals. So hearing that like almost all of these do have Stormcast at the forefront, being the minority in those armies was a revelation for me, at least. Maybe I just didn't read the core book as thoroughly, but
well, didn't they talk about that? Yeah, a lot of times they had the Stormcast come with, but there were occasions where sometimes it was just mortals, but the track records of those did I make this up? That the track records of those Dawnbringer Crusades were not great, and that like it was almost a guarantee that they were doomed from the start, and if they didn't have like a Stormcast contingent, they were just almost like they're going to get wiped out for sure.
They were practically like written off.
Yeah,
from the get-go.
Yeah, so that's something I didn't know. I mean, or just like I haven't seen it spelled out so clearly that like you're going to really want a Stormcast, force with you. Otherwise, you're basically signing your own death warrant.
Yeah, it's a tax write-off.
Oh man, death and taxes.
Either a tax write-off or this is a super dark interpretation that is not mentioned in the book. But let's just think about it here for a second. So the problem with the Stormcast is they're having problems getting up through the cursed skies, right? The chambers are only in half strength. How the heck are you going to get more people to go and sacrifice themselves for Sigmar? unless you just send the populace out to go and sacrifice themselves for Sigmar. How many more Stormcast are we going to get if we send mortals to their death? We're probably going to get a lot more Stormcast, aren't we?
Yeah.
I mean, but like Sigmar has proven that he can just like steal alive people, right? He doesn't need them to like kill themselves to do. Well, I don't
But they
know.
need
We
to
don't
prove
get into it.
themselves to him.
Yeah, they need to be proven.
And
True.
I would have done a mic drop, but I don't want to break my mic. But I was gonna, I was thinking mic drop.
You got to get that extended warranty for all your mic drops, Paul. Any other Dawnbringer Crusade thoughts? And if not, any other Age of Beast thoughts? Guys, we made it.
No.
We're present day. We're all the way here. Whew, it's been a slog. Good job, team. Let's break out of this. What is this? It's not a history class. There's other facts and figures we want to learn about. Let's take a step back from this history and instead talk about maybe the Stormcast generally, or as a whole, or like what makes them who they are, so to speak. There were a few questions about how the faction is organized these days. We've had so many Battletomes. I looked it up. I think this is the 6th Battletome now at this point. You can imagine that there's been a little bit of a disarray or quite a bit of an evolution in terms of the organization of Stormcast. Feel free to be as specific or as general as you'd like, but how do you feel that the Stormcast Eternals are organized, and what jumped out at you there?
I think they have a frankly messy structure, but overall a structure that I think works, if that makes any sense. So at the highest level, the Stormcast are broken up into different storm hosts, essentially the different colors of the armor. And we can talk more about like what those specific storm hosts are later. And from there, like you have like special temples where heroes can train, but the bulk of their organization comes in these chambers. So we had mentioned that at the beginning, there were just the liberators and the prosecutors and the adjudicators. Like that's the warrior chamber. We talked about the sacrosanct, which were the mage chambers, and the vanguard auxiliary chamber. And it's like the chambers are more or less like the groupings of different types of soldiers. And then if you go a little bit deeper, that's where things start to get a little messier, but I personally think it works out, because within these chambers we have conclaves, which are where individual soldiers have their like specialties. An example I wanted to call out is the Redeemer Conclave. These are your standard foot soldiers, but they look different depending on the chamber they're in. So the Warrior Chamber Redeemers are going to be your Liberators, the very standard-looking Stormcast. They have a hammer, and they have a shield, and they have their special armor. But then for the Sacrosanct, you have Sequitors, and these are the ones wearing robes, and they have a mace, and they have a shield, and they can use a little bit of magic. And you can have people from the same conclave, such as Redeemer, fulfilling the same role, but how they do it is different based on the chamber that they're in.
Yeah, I'd call it as the conclave is what you do, and your chamber is how you do it, maybe, or how you look while doing it, maybe. I don't even know if you necessarily do it differently, but maybe you do it in a different visual way. Is one way to look. So like your conclaves can cross chambers. That if it was just that way, that would be very helpful. But as we find, there's always exceptions to that, or individuals that sort of break that mold. But generally, that is the box that exists, and then we find examples of things that sort of think outside the box. But I'm trying to think if I have anything else to add. I mean, there's the whole leadership concept as well, and that we're dealing with a 2-tiered leadership structure where whether it's storm hosts or chambers, or what do they call even they use a different word for units. Like a unit in the game is called nuts. What is it called? It's like contingent or something. I can't remember.
Retinue.
Yeah, retinue. Exactly. So like there are different tiers at that level, but then even beyond that, there is sort of a broad hierarchy between our lords, which are for lack of I don't have another word for Lord. I mean, it is just like your higher tier type of leadership, who are then sort of supported by their knights, which is the second tier leadership as well. And there's a wide range from any battlefield role you can imagine. There are lords that would do it, and then also their knights underneath them, serving each of the typically serving sort of the chambers, or the chambers inform sort of the form and function of these lords and knights. It's not worth getting. There's way too many to even get into most of them. But maybe we can touch on some of the newer ones when we get there.
Did you also talk about the brotherhoods?
No, not at all. By all means, chime in.
So everything that Will said is absolutely correct. And there is nothing incorrect about what he said in any way, shape, or form. However, in addition, there are also brotherhoods. And brotherhoods are basically just like, this thing needs to be done. All right, I'm in charge. I need these things to go do this thing. Doesn't matter what conclave, doesn't matter what host. These are the things that I need to do the thing. Okay, we're now a brotherhood. And that brotherhood can go and do whatever they need to for indefinite amounts of time. And they may disband immediately upon finishing their purpose, or they may stay together for longer points of time. And I only bring that up to point out that how are the Stormcast organized? Whatever way you want them to be organized is totally fine, because they have ways of making any organization work, right? If you want to put Draconith with Dracoths with Liberators, there's a organization for that, right? If you want to put prosecutors and Stormtrike chariots, and then you want to add some judicators, there's an organization for that. If you want to ran the Vanguard chapter or the Vanguard chamber, there's definitely an organization for that. Everything is very flexible, and it has some hard and fast statements, but all of them kind of allow everything to work together. And, you only want a couple units of Stormcast? Fine, run a Dawnbringer Crusade. That totally works too. Like, everything works for the Stormcast.
Yeah, and that's why I say it's messy, because that messiness is where your freedom as a player lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Normally we talk about, or sometimes I bring up this topic and I say we already talked about it, which is what I'm going to do right now. And that it's worth, an army by knowing what motivates them or what their goals are. But I think it's very clear what we talked about thus far. What's motivating the Stormcast is their need to reclaim the mortal realms from the forces of chaos, and then also destruction and death, depending on who the enemy of the day is, and re-establish it as a place for those forces of order to, survive, thrive, bring back those halcyon days of the Age of Myth. Do you guys have any other motivations from our Stormcast that are worth bringing up?
Well, what we have glanced over a little bit is that they also have their memories. So a lot of the newer Stormcast, their motivations are who they were in life. But the more
small scale,
the more reforged you go, it's whatever Sigmar has told me to do, right? And the reason why I bring that up is because some of the coolest stories that we have about Stormcast are, and the Brotherhoods come in here too, where somebody says, I have been killed, I have been reforged as a Stormcast, and you know what? That Korgus Cole guy, I hate him. I'm going to make it my immortal life's work to make sure that he goes down. And then you form a brotherhood for that specific purpose, to go take him out, right? And that's a super important part of the actual coolness of a Stormcast. And the other thing is that some of these personality quirks, which for a normal general, right? If I'm running my living city general and he's kind of a hunter and he likes to be in the shadows and lead from the back until he knows that the strike will be a full strike and make it work, right? That's just who my character is, because my character is a human, right? For a Stormcast, it's oh yeah, he does that because he has these echoes of this memory from his life and his son died from this thing, so therefore that's bad for him, right? Or no, he's actually got a lightning man that tells him what's going to happen, And that's why he has this little quirk, right? If a Stormcast has a quirk, it's absolutely intentional and it is a fundamental part of his character. And that is a cool thing we don't see in other armies, in other battletomes, that you have to really come up with a permanent reason for why this would happen, right? But it is also one of the coolest things about the Stormcast, is that even though you may have the same character, they're constantly evolving as they lose something, right? So that's cool.
Yeah, true. Will, you got any other motivations you want to talk about?
No, just like part of that motivation is like for like a lot of them, they don't want to give up themselves. And we kind of see like some groups like creating identities that they think may be from their past, or they forge identities like together in their brotherhoods just so they have some bit of what they think is themselves, even if it's not who they were when they were once mortal. So I think like that idea of just trying to hold on to something is a huge motivator for many of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. Pulling the camera back a little bit, expanding the view. We're talking about sort of the motivations of like Stormcast as a collective. To that same end, they obviously can't take the realms back themselves. As we've sort of touched on a few of the allies, or I'll say allies in quotes, who are sort of the Stormcast's allies. Who do they count on in this crazy mixed up world of theirs? And then we'll ask who the enemies are next. But are there any allies that you guys really feel are worth calling out to the Stormcast Eternals?
Cities of Sigmar are a super strong ally. Basically, all the lore ties them both together intrinsically with each other. And I think the Seraphon could be considered a pretty key ally as well. There's a lot of little things that tie them together. The Seraphon have been talked about specifically helping with the Dawnbringer Crusades. The Seraphon have a super strong bond with the Dracoths and the Dragoniths. So in that way as well, they are super bonded to that idea. One of the main new figures that we got, Krondus, spent pretty much the entire time when he was in exile in the Celestial Heavens, communing with the Seraphon. So those would be my two big ones.
Yeah, and then like the answer for almost everyone else is like they are sometimes allies. All of the other forces of order will fight alongside the Stormcast, and we have many situations where there are bonds between specific Storm hosts based on like where they physically are forging these alliances. But like there is still bad blood in order as a whole from that whole Burning Skies thing where Sigmar fought alone while everyone else was doing their own thing, and with the penumbral engines and Sigmar sort of stealing knowledge from the elves, and with Morathi stabbing him in the back and Alariel going into exile and all this stuff, it's hard to say that Sigmar has any like true allies, but he has a large pool of people that he can pull into these conflicts to almost form like those temporary brotherhoods, but across factions.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true. It's there's a reason why the Pantheon was always sort of tenuous to begin with, right? Like there was already cracks even as far back as the Age of Myth, and there's a continuous sort of an attempt to repair what cracks he can with those other order gods. But like it's a tough row to hoe, and I feel like when you're a god, you've got a long memory. A lot of when focusing on some of the slights that you've endured, but that's to say nothing of the enemies then of the Stormcast, and of these there are many. They come from all shapes and sizes, basically. So we talked about how the Stormcast were obviously created as a response to the Age of Chaos. Thus, essentially, all forces of chaos are persona non grata, I guess. Not big fans of the Stormcast, and the feeling is mutual. But it doesn't stop there. It's interesting in that he also finds enemies, he being Sigmar, in the forces of death and destruction. Both of sort of them or their leaders were one-time allies, and so that has sort of a poetic, maybe not poetic, but a certain level of tragedy behind him, knowing that at one point he did work alongside Gorka Morka and Nagash, but those alliances have long since fallen apart. And I think, depending on who you ask, the forces of death and destruction are right up there with chaos, depending on the day and what his mood is. Essentially, he has very little love lost from all three of those, I guess, grand alliances, which covers a wide swath of the residents of the mortal realms. Anything you guys want to say about the enemies?
I think this is a good time to bring up patron Klaus MA's question of are the Stormcast still the main threat to chaos?
Perfect timing.
Talking this animosity. And my answer is yes. I do think that as a whole, it is the Stormcast are chaos's greatest foe. The only reason you would think that someone else is a real challenge to chaos is Catacross has his own little foothold in the 8 points, but that's only one front of battle where we have the Dawnbringer Crusades and the Stormcast trying to conquer every square mile of territory that used to be owned by chaos. Catacross is a convenient distraction for Archaon, but no one would say he is the biggest threat to chaos.
Well, Catacross might say that.
Well, yeah.
I'm gonna go ahead and disagree with you there for a narrative reason. And I'm going to say that Illyriel is actually the biggest threat to chaos right now.
Ooh.
Get out of your... Okay, whatever.
We're going for it.
Because she is in complete ascendancy at the end of Broken Realms, to the point where she's destroying Sigmar's stuff that he doesn't necessarily want destroyed. She's destroying Seraphon's stuff, right? If there is a god that is at ascendancy right now, it is Illyriel. And Illyriel has always hated chaos, and particularly Nurgle. So I will definitely take the argument that for 3 of the 4 chaos gods, Stormcast could probably be considered to be their greatest foe. Although I think they've done a great job of parsing out that the elves in particular hate Slaanesh. And,
oh yeah,
right. And so Stormcast are absolutely against Khorne. And they're definitely Khorne's greatest foe, right? Tzeentch, I don't know who you would put there to be their greatest foe, but as far as Nurgle is concerned, Illyriel is absolutely going to be the top one against all of Nurgle's forces. And like I said, I because she is in ascendancy, I think there's a reason to say that she is the biggest threat to chaos right now.
Yeah. And we still don't know the full extent of the repercussions of her big plays. So, yeah.
She did hint. She had a lot of hints. So we'll see how that plays out. All right, let's shift gears entirely. Let's see where the rubber hits the road or where the lore hits the tabletop. I don't know if that's a great metaphor. But there were a bunch of new units or models introduced in this Battletome on top of hands down the largest range that existed in the game to begin with. There's a lot to parse. Let's try this. How about, I would love to hear your guys' favorite new units, models, characters that have been introduced into the Battletome with AOS 3.0, and you're gonna have to explain why. So cite your sources, show your work, and talk about what some of your favorites are. There's a lot to like in this book. So, Will, being the guest, I want to hear what your favorite new stuff is.
Yeah, so I'm gonna hop into my new favorite unit. It is the Knight Relictor. Because some background, the Lord Relictor is it came in the first box of Age of Sigmar models and has been crucial to the lore, and now we have the new, less powerful version. But the reason I think this unit is super cool is, and why I picked it, is because it actually calls back to something Paul had theorized earlier about the Dawnbringer Crusades potentially giving us more Stormcast. The cool thing about the Knights Relictor is that they burn like the bones of saints, like sacrificing these relics of martyrs to protect the souls of Stormcast. And they say that they take these bones, they take the parts of these martyrs from those who die in the Crusades, and yet even that is a limited resource. So they are going about like sending people along on these holy wars to get this religious power, and it's still not enough.
I mean, watch out in Illinois, and in a couple weeks. Then, Will, I just say be safe.
Yeah, right. It's going to be some havoc.
Paul, what was your favorite?
I really enjoyed Bastian Carthalos. I enjoyed his old lore, his mortal lore, his cleansing of Azir lore, and just an awesome model. So all three of those things together are super cool. So I liked him a lot.
Yeah, right on. I thought for sure someone was going to say the Stormdrake Guard, because obviously those are the best. And so I didn't even bother to like prepare my spiel for them because I'm like, I'm going to let someone else have them. But like, they're awesome. They're just, I mean, from an aesthetic standpoint, they're hands down the cool, in my opinion, the coolest. So essentially, I'm trying to think what stands out for them beyond the fact that these are newly hatched Draconiths. I'm sorry. That, from the eggs that were sort of held by the Seraphon. They bond with a Stormcast after like watching them for a long time, because the Draconiths are discerning mount, and they won't just let anyone ride them, and so eventually they'll follow a Stormcast and sort of circle above them, keeping an eye on them, and eventually if they determine that they're strong enough or brave enough or what have you, or they're dedicated enough to sort of reconquering the realms, they'll swoop down and through violence sort of bond with the Stormcast. That's kind of a standard story or explanation.
Tale as old as time.
A tale. I was literally thinking that in my head, which makes sense, and then it ends up making a really cool unit. One thing that jumps out at me is the fact that from a hierarchy perspective, we were talking with Shadow Claimer earlier about this in the Discord. It's odd that these guys sort of eschew any sort of hierarchy or like organizational structure in the Stormcast echelons. They don't report to the regular chamber leadership that they would normally, and so they're sort of outside that structure. I think that's weird. I don't know why that is. It must be something to do with the fact that like the Draconiths don't owe allegiance to anybody, and so maybe it would be unfair to sort of saddle them underneath a Lord Celestant or something. Yeah. So I guess that's why.
That was my reading of it as well. Like they're not Stormcast, so they're not going to go into Stormcast structure. At any moment, they could just leave if they wanted to.
Sure, but why would they?
Well, the other thing is, I thought I read that the Draconith are actually on a quest to protect and find more Draconith and to actually claim the realms for the Draconith as well.
Yep.
Yeah,
they are rebuilding the Draconith Empire.
And
that can't go wrong ever, will it?
No, absolutely not. It's probably worth mentioning that the Draconith, like the difference between like the Draconith and like the Storm Azir based Draco things that we've seen before is, as I just said, like the Star Drakes and the Dracos, they're very much like residents and like they're creatures of Azir. And it's sort of reflected on their abilities and how they see themselves. Where the Draconith, I think if they didn't just exclusively came from Gur, like that's where they spent a lot of time, right? And they're much more of the realms, so to speak. And so that's like one of the distinctions between the two groups, which I guess I can buy.
Yeah, and I love like how like this is just such a dumb thing that I enjoy. That's on the model of them is that every single Draconith model has mutton chops. Like despite being scaled dragons, they all have hairy mutton chops, and
They're all Elvis.
It's the greatest gift.
Nice. I mean, we all have things that we love. You love mutton chops on dragons.
Yeah. I learned something. I learned something about you today. what I was going to talk about, because I assume someone was going to talk about the Stormdrake Guard, is that I'm also a big fan of the Vigilors just because they look really, really cool, and they seem like Stormcast versions of Weight Watchers from Wood Elves, which I thought were super neat.
Yeah.
They got their swords and they got the bows at the same time, and they're looking very agile. I'm like, oh, those guys are Stormcast Weight Watchers. Any other units or things that you guys want to chat about? Grab dry, favorite, least favorite, maybe? I don't know, not to be negative, but...
Yeah, so I'm going to pair the two dragon characters together as like a favorite unique character, partially because they come in the same box, so it counts. But so Krondys and Karazai, they are the two named Draconists who like existed in the story. And I knew I was going to say this later, so I didn't mention it before when you mentioned you don't know what they were doing during the Age of Chaos or where they went. But what they were doing is that Karazai, the Scarred, was like a normal prince who then turned around after his empire was destroyed and just started punching everything in Gur and just never stopped. And he doesn't really ally with anyone. He just shows up the night before a battle just to kill things. Whereas like Krondys is like the more regal, he's the more princely. His title is Son of Dracothian. And I think you had mentioned this, Aaron. He was just hanging out in his ear the whole time, just like kind of watching the Stormcast, hanging out with Bassi and Carthalos, killing dragon ogres, and then when Kragnos showed up, he started calling the alarm. And I think it's interesting that you've got these two Draconists who start at the same point, but then went on two wildly divergent paths.
Yeah. The Son of Dracothian. So that's what I was going to say. I mean, a lot of folks claim that they're the Son of Dracothian. So I mean, who's to say really? His lineage is a little muddy at some point. But I think it was cool that like the more civilized of the two brothers is all like into magic and stuff, but the Scarred, who had taken a beating from Kragnos, had basically succumbed to sort of his bestial nature. And if I understand, he's not like a caster at all, if I understand correctly. So I like that sort of two sides of a similar coin, but they're very, very different and similar at the same time. Very cool. I guess we're talking about special characters now. We could probably talk about a few of the other ones that have been introduced in this book. Is there even a few, or is there only one more? No, I guess there's only the one more. And that is Andrasta, the Celestial Spear, who shows up in the Dominion box. We had mentioned her earlier, and then I am trying to think what else there is.
Before she was reforged, she was a Gurish, I want to say war queen. At the very least, she wasn't the queen. Specifically, wasn't.
Yeah.
Because her queen died, and she led like a battalion, armada. I don't know what you call it when they fly, but are land creatures. And a group of Pegasus Knights into battle. And like she is very much a person of Gur, and that stuck with her when she was reforged. She now has super cool wings. It never says if they're like just bird wings for being from Gur or if they are Pegasus wings, because she was a Pegasus Knight.
My money says Pegasus wings.
Yeah, which is just interesting to think about. But she is Sigmar's hunter. She goes around killing great beasts. I had talked about her in the Frozen Lightning story of just like flying in to kill that lord, and like her purpose is just to find the biggest thing and kill it. It mentions that she's killed Dragon Emperor, she's killed like all of these great foes, but she still has a list of creatures that she needs to take down. Right now, the main one is Kragnos. Her whole thing in the current story is hunting down this big horseman and putting him down.
Yeah, and it's I think only a matter of time before they come head to head, right? They've been telegraphing this fight for so long on pay-per-view, tune in, that I think it's a sure thing that they're going to eventually clash, or big missed opportunity if not. One thing I thought it was interesting about her is she ties into like Sigmar's like great bolts somehow. So she was like what had like killed her tribe or something was this great, it's a bloodthirster? Bloodthirster? Yep. Called Doom.
It's a demon king, is what it was listed.
Some sort of
so it might have been a bloodthirster, but it was also definitely a demon king.
Gotcha. And so she's fighting it to the death, right? And so she gets it into this lock, and she calls out to Sigmar saying, "Hey, look, take us both out." He hurls one of his great bolts, which I don't know too much about. Like this Battletome was the first time I was really exposed to them. He's got these 12 bolts, but this was a big one, and it doesn't straight up kill the demon because you can't really kill a demon. It presumably just got rocketed back to the realm of chaos, but it is what kicked off her introduction to the Stormcast. And so that demon is also on her list, on her to-do list, alongside Kragnos as well.
So the 12 bolts, there are also a couple of, like I said earlier, callbacks to the old world. So the 12 bolts seem to be a callback to the old world, but they're AOS now. So one of the storm hosts worships a blade spirit of 12 swords of Sigmar, which were the Rune Fang in the old world. But now we have the bolts of Sigmar, which are the new Rune Fang, right? His new weapons. But because he leads the Stormcast, so Bastion Carthalos is one of those storm bolts. Dark Alec asked a question about this. Yndrasta is one of them as well. So it's interesting that we have two of the storm bolts that are listed, but then the Celestant Prime is not one of the bolts. But he's given Galmaraz, which is the artifact that Sigmar had from the old world. So
is that not enough, Paul?
Well, he didn't move until he had it, so it is exactly enough. And nothing but Galmaraz is enough, apparently, for the Celestant Prime. So are we going to see more of this? I would think so. Usually when they introduce a finite number of a thing, we see up to 50%, or more.
That's true.
Yeah.
So I imagine we are going to see at least a couple more characters made from the Great Bolts. But who knows what they are? It could be kind of anything or anyone, really. So
yeah, here's to hoping.
Yeah.
Bastion Carthalos, Paul, you'd brought him up earlier. He's he was the first Lord Commander that we know about. We didn't really get into his backstory at all. But you'd mentioned because he had also taken a Great Bolt.
But the interesting thing is he's not the only named Lord Commander, though. There are a couple of other named Lord Commanders in this book. But he's definitely the first one to get a model.
Oh, yeah. True. And also, was he the first named? I don't know. Was he the first Lord Commander out of all of them? Maybe I'm adding something.
So the Celestant Prime is the first Stormcast that was created. And Bastion Carthalos became a Stormcast early on, but he was not the first to be made into a Stormcast, even of the people after the Celestant Prime. He proved himself in battle in the Scouring of Azir. And then that is when he was named the Celestant Prime, or the Lord
Commander.
Yeah, Lord Commander. And I do really enjoy that Sigmar calls him the late Bastion, because he was the last person through the Realm Gate before he closed it. It's just all right, I saved you, and I saved all of Azir for years fighting so you could leave in. And what happens when I get to Azir? Sigmar's like, oh, you're the late one for the next millennia. It's just it's amusing.
Yeah. Well, I love it because, Aaron, you had talked about that battle was the first time we actually see Sigmar fighting alongside humans. And it's interesting, how he reacts and talks to the people in the Age of Myth. He fought alongside them. He's got nicknames for them. But then you don't see that carry forward as more and more Stormcast join the ranks. So just like the Stormcast themselves lose their humanity, Sigmar sort of loses that connection to the humans that he once had.
Yeah, he kind of becomes less and less of that barbarian king, always on the front lines smashing things up with hammer, and becomes much more of a thoughtful, reflective. He has to rely on his brains as opposed to his fists, especially because he was missing his hammer for so long. So it's hard to rely on that too. But it is interesting to see sort of that evolution. And isn't that kind of like the classic transition from, mythological gods, in that, like, there was a time long ago where the gods walked amongst us and, did great miracles and things like that, but they're long since gone now. It sort of mirrors a lot of that, real life mythology that exists. I don't know, maybe not today, but, in our history, which is pretty neat. So as a Lord Commander, you say, where has he been? There's been a lot of nonsense going on in the realms that I would reckon he ought to have been dealing with. I know my boy Vandus Hammerhand's been out there on the front lines. Where has our Lord Commander been? Apparently just been in Azir planning, which is what, the strongest, best fighters. I guess I shouldn't be so dismissive of it. Sigmar had to do the exact same thing. It's just surprising to me to think that this Lord Commander, his name has not been uttered in 6 real life years. He's just been hanging out.
He is the late, so.
Yeah, that's true. Man, again, that's a good point. Maybe that's an inside joke that I didn't put 2 and 2 together. Solid. Actually, speaking of Vandus Hammerhand, we had a question about Vandus that we'll bring up. Darth Alec asked, where do you think... Nope, that's not what he said. Aaron, read the question. Where are GW going with the Lightning Man and Vandus? So, Vandus Hammerhand, everybody knows Vandus, right? You guys know Vandus. Another hammer is Sigmar, who I would have thought was the shoe-in for the Lord Commander position, but apparently nobody asked me. He was like that first Lord Celestin model on a Dracoth. He was in all the Realm Gate Wars, kicking butt, taking names. And he had been reforged a handful of times. And at one point, he came back with the power of visions. And as time went on, and I think he was reforged multiple times after that, but he started actually seeing this Lightning Man, first in his visions, but then also like in real life, like in the corner of his eyes, and, just, always hounding him in some way. And the question is, what is this? Is this Lightning Man just a weird quirk of his reforging? Or does it have some sort of knowledge? Does it have some sort of personality? Does it have agency? Is it a real character somehow? And where are we going with this? Because it seems to be haunting Vandus. Darth Alec wants to know what you think GW is going to do with this Lightning Man in the future. Do you guys have any thoughts?
I think that narratively, GW is giving every main character for the Stormcast an obvious idiosyncrasy or an obvious flaw. And I think this is definitely Vandus's. Especially because it's not necessarily his flaw. It still allows him to be a pure Stormcast, right? But something is haunting him, which is also something that makes sense for Stormcast, even as they are newly forged, right? So I think that we are definitely going to see more of the Lightning Man. In what context that's going to take, I don't know. It did say in the book that Vandus has a suspicion that perhaps this is him after he has been reforged beyond use, right? Like that this Lightning Man is him in the future, which is a completely interesting thing to think that there might be time travel or, some ability to travel back in time in order to communicate.
The one thing Age of Sigmar is missing is time travel. What do you think, Will? Where's this Lightning Man going?
Yeah, that's a tough one because it talks about Vandus leading the Hammerhallian crusades and conquering new lands. And as he's doing it, he's just raiding every library, every temple, looking for information. I suspect if he comes back in a major way into the overarching narrative, it's because he's going to find some piece of forbidden knowledge, some piece of forbidden power, so to speak.
Yeah,
we already had that release.
Yeah,
double forbidden power, verboten power. My guess is it's going to have something to do with lightning geist in the future. I know that's one of Paul's favorite theories, just in general, and that I think it has the potential to be sort of linked into where they're going to go with the evolution of that sort of lightning aspect of the Stormcast. And so I don't know what shape that will take, maybe just a ball of lightning. But I think there's enough of a connection there that we could see them linked up in somehow.
So interestingly enough, actually, there is one of the short stories in the Storm Host talked about the Knights Excelsior from Excelsis. and how people talk about how they are seen fighting on the battlefield with suits of Stormcast armor that have lightning striking out from them that don't completely contain the spirits within. So perhaps there are already lightning guys fighting in Stormcast armor in the realms. So that may be something that we are already starting to see happen.
Yeah. It's. I think they were making to agree with you. I think they were making a point to try and find like some like hallmark of each of these storm hosts. To this is going to be a good segue. Check this out. To identify hallmarks of some of these storm hosts and find ways to sort of link in their like reforging, I don't know, shortcomings or foibles in some way. And so that seems like that could be theirs, which is pretty neat. Oh, damn it. There's a second part of the question, though. This isn't a good segue.
Yeah, good.
Darth Alec also asks, do you feel the lore justifies why all of the old named characters are stuck in old pattern armor? Vandus and Gardas seem sure to be worthy of new digs. That was a clunky transition. But I feel this, Darth Alec. I feel it in my bones in that like they had just released Gardas in his sweet superhero pose, but in the old armor, and not weeks later, they introduced these new Thunderstrike armor. They hand wave it a little bit in the book in the Gardas' entry, saying that like, oh no, he's cool, he's humble, he doesn't need that newfangled nonsense. When he in his day, they didn't need this explodey Thunderstrike armor. They got the job done with a cloak made of hammers, and that's good enough for him. I find that excuse a little hollow. I think Gardas is and Vandus obviously are prime candidates for this armor, but you got to do what the models say. It's a model company first, and I guess you got to do what you got to do. Did this strike you guys at all?
It really did, because you had mentioned they lampshaded it a little bit, but that actually just annoyed me even more.
Agreed.
It said something like the rest of the Hallowed Knights were like trying to make him the Lord Commander and trying to get him in Thunderstrike armor, and it's like it was just like a few months apart. Come on. Someone needs to go kill Gardas so he can come back as the Lord Commander in Thunderstrike armor.
But the problem is, I mean, that wouldn't even do it. They're not going to redo the model, unfortunately. So, like, right. What's worse is he also won't get Thunderstrike armor anytime soon at all. So not only does he not get it now, he's not destined for it, which is also a shame because he's pretty cool. Paul, any other thoughts on that?
It doesn't really bother me. I mean,
of course it doesn't.
Well, I mean, full disclosure, Stormcast are not my favorite. They're great. The narrative thrust that they have and they provide to the game is amazing. But I have like 5,000 points of Stormcast, and I gave them to my kids to play with because it's not something that really engages me in my hobby. So it doesn't bother me that it's not in Thunderstrike armor. I did paint up that one because I thought the model was so cool. So, and I haven't painted up any Thunderstrike armor models yet. So obviously I thought that Vandus's model was super more cooler than all the other Thunderstrike Stormcast that came after. So, yeah. And it's also just, it is an artifact of the fact that it's a model company first. Like, the fact that they came out so close, I would have to imagine is some kind of supply driven or whatever issue, or somebody had that model finished for forever and they needed an excuse to release it. And therefore it just ended up being that their excuse showed up 4 weeks before they had this whole new box set to do. But it doesn't bother me, but
fine.
A well-reasoned argument, and I will choose to ignore it.
I don't want well-reasoned. I want passion. All right. Back to my sweet segue that I had to drop, but I'm going to pick it back up. The Storm hosts, you guys. I feel like we've been beating around the bush, but there's all sorts of Storm hosts that add so much flavor to our Stormcast here. I want to hear about your guys' favorite, and I will ask Will. What's your fave?
So I am going to jump in with the Tempest Lords.
Who?
The Tempest Lords are the ones who are like featured in, I don't know if they're featured in a single Black Library novel.
Not that I'm aware of.
I could be wrong. If they are, they're like the side piece to the main characters. But the story behind these folks are that almost every single one of them is a former leader or former like nobility. They call themselves the host on high, the blue-blooded, the rulers above. And I think it exemplifies part of like what the Stormcast appeal is to me, where every soldier is a hero. They take that to the extreme where every soldier was a king. The lowliest foot soldier of the Stormcast Eternals was worthy of like ruling a kingdom no matter how small, and they still accept their position as the lowliest foot soldier. Like they come off as like very proud and arrogant, but I think it's also like a bit of humility, like being able to accept that lower position. I think it could have a lot of cool narrative effects if they ever write a book about them.
Yeah, I can see why you'd like that. That makes sense. Paul, what's your fave?
My favorite Storm host are the Astral Templars. They wear furs and stuff. They're the beast hunters. Although I have to say this is a sore point for me. They're my favorite because of Hamilcar. And you know who isn't in this book? Hamilcar. And I miss him because Hamilcar is awesome. And they even have a quote from an Astral Templar who's not Hamilcar. And like, I just think of all the quotes you could have put that Hamilcar has said in that side thing. That would have been amazing. But they didn't. So,
yeah. And the little emblem, the little emblem they have has a bear on it. And it's like, come on.
It's like, please, can we just do Hamilcar? But
let me eat that bear.
I know, right? Please let me eat that bear, and then everything will be great. So that's my only like big sore point. But it is. I wish it wasn't. But the Anvils of the Held and Hammer are also, I think, pretty cool. They are all souls claimed by Sigmar from the underworlds of Shyish, already numbered amongst the long dead. So I think that's a really cool narrative hook and a really cool background for them. So I like that. They are the reason why Nagash is so angry at Sigmar for stealing his soldiers, because they are actually good soldiers. So,
but if it wasn't that, he'd have something else to be angry about too.
Oh yeah,
like you can't just pigeonhole that one. My favorite Storm host is a little cliche because it's. I mean, everybody loves these guys. Are the Hallowed Knights, the boys in blue and silver? They're. I don't know. They in some ways they stand out to me because they aren't your typical Stormcast in that it's. The book talks about how Stormcast are bred for war. Like all of them are meant to be used on the battlefield to different degrees, to different effects. But like the idea is that they're warriors first. And that is true of the Hallowed Knights, but that wasn't always true of, the people that they were. They are oftentimes, though not always, reforged from humans that weren't necessarily warriors. They could have been healers or, priests. Generally, what Sigmar is looking for this Storm host is for those that are faithful, which we know because of their battle cry, only the faithful. And so if you've ever heard anybody utter that phrase in the Age of Sigmar space, it's because you're talking about the Hallowed Knights. There's very few catchphrases in the Age of Sigmar, but so if you've got one, it must mean it's a winner, I guess. That and the Bad Moon spoke to me once is also a good catchphrase.
I like that one a lot.
Yeah. So what do? They're concerned because they're faithful and not necessarily gung-ho warriors. Their real goal is to purge corruption in the realms, right? They come from healers and those who are offering succor to the downtrodden, and so they do a lot of purging of corruption, which is pretty legit. We see that in the Hallowed Knights taking on Gairan in the Realm Gate Wars, right? Because it was sort of infected by Nurgle. Hallowed Knights rolled up with the goal of purging that corruption. Now, when it comes to this is stuff that I always sort of knew before, but this is now we got to the point where things I didn't know. if we're trying to come up with some sort of negative to the Hallowed Knights, which is hard to do because they're so great, what we're finding now is these days is because of their sort of devotion and like fervorous dedication to Sigmar, they are sort of forming a little bit of a cult of purity. They think that, you know, their faith will get them through, you know, essentially anything. And so they're starting to wear corrupted chaos emblems, with the implication being that, like, I'm so dedicated and faithful, and that Sigmar will protect me, that I don't need to worry about the corruption of these chaos emblems. And I'm sure that's not going to come back to bite them in the butt. And so it sort of takes their perspective to the extreme, which is pretty interesting. And then in terms of what we're seeing from their sort of like a unifying reforging issue is that there's talk of some of the Hallowed Knights, when they're getting reforged, they're starting to hear the voice of Sigmar in their head, which is a little weird. Because Sigmar can just talk to you. He doesn't need to voice in your head. Like he can come knock on your door. He can walk on over. So it's interesting to think that, is this actually the voice of Sigmar? Is it them going a little, I don't want to say crazy, because they're not crazy, but is it a relic of their reforging? And it's just maybe coincidence that whatever the voice is telling them to do ends up working out in the long run. But like, is that always going to be true? Or is it just a coincidence that they're leading them on like a justifiable path? So maybe something will come of that in the future. Interesting. Only time will tell. So that's my spiel about the Hallowed Knights, only the faithful. And Gardas is pretty legit. So that's some of our favorite storm hosts. I'll call out a few others because people had some questions about them. So, for example, there's another storm host called the Knights Excelsior. And Will Lawless on the Discord, patron Will Lawless on the Discord, wanted to know, what does the future hold for Knights Excelsior and their particular brand of moral clarity? I know what he's talking about when he says moral clarity, but for everyone else, what do you guys think he means by moral clarity as it relates to the Knights Excelsior?
I think he's talking about how they just slaughter everybody and say, they're evil anyway.
Nice. So that's if that's not moral clarity, I don't know what is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. To the point where when Excelsis was being attacked by Kragnos, they're still sending out Stormcast to go and round up all the chaos-tainted people. And that was one of my favorite parts at the beginning of the Dominion novel, where they go out and they're starting to round up people, even though the city is completely destroyed. Well, somebody must be responsible for it. Let's go find those witches and burn them.
That's all witches are good for, burn them.
Do I think that there's going to be any repercussions? Not particularly.
Why would there be?
Yeah, well, it's so, and I think that's actually one of the things I appreciated, which I talked about earlier, where they're starting to have these like treasures or reasons why the faith is slightly different in one city from another, right? And so I think Excelsis is going to be one of those places where the reason why pilgrims would come from other places is because of something to do with more faith or purity, right? And yeah, I just think it will define the way that the city evolves from here on out. But as far as like, you know, the whole order getting purged or something like that, I don't believe that's going to happen.
Right on. Will, do you think we're going anywhere with this moral clarity of the Knights Excelsior?
Honestly, I agree with Paul. I don't really think there's going to be much added on. I do think it's interesting that, and like he had mentioned, the Dominion novel, it could be a thing with Excelsis where a lot of the people who are joining the Crusades were just trying to get out of there.
Yeah.
Like, you know what? I'm just going to walk out those doors. I'm going to risk it because I know these dudes are going to kill me because I stole a candy bar 2 weeks ago. Like,
what are you doing stealing candy bars? Will, come on. I didn't know I had a thief on my podcast.
You know,
everyone's
got their thing.
Yeah, that's true. Does make you feel alive.
Yeah.
I think, at least for now, the story in Excelsis and thus the Knights Excelsior, I think is probably done for a hot second. They'll probably set that one down. And it's not to say they won't circle back to it, but I think it's carried a lot of narrative weight thus far, and I think it's time to give it a break. Like, it was an issue back when Tzeentch was sort of trying to take over the city. There's the White Reaper. Like, there's that whole storyline. If we keep banging that drum, I think it's going to lose some of its effect, and so I think we need to take a step back and maybe focus on some other storm hosts. Speaking of storm host questions, let's ask another one. This time from Magnus, patron Magnus from the Discord. He asks, with everything going on in the mortal realms right now, in your honest opinions, guys, honest opinions, which storm host is Daddy Sigmar most proud of at the moment? And yeah, Hammer's a Sigmar, right? Like, that's obvious.
Yeah, I was going to say Hammer's a Sigmar.
Yeah.
It's obvious, but also the punny version of, even though they're the poster boys, I think he'd be the most proud because they're swooping in to areas where like the other storm hosts should be doing things and then doing their job. They're the ones who swoop down to fight at Amberstone Watch, which is the starter box for 3.0. They're the ones flying out to Olgu to go to Harrow Deep. So like they're not even letting the other people get a chance to do the cool stuff.
Yeah, right. It's like playing an RPG where someone is playing everybody else's character for them. Come on, man, give me a break. I was getting there. I was going to do it. Oh well. Aw, shucks. So I agree with you, Paul. Do you have a different answer? Oftentimes, you have a different answer for these questions.
I don't think there is a different answer.
Nice, good. This is the first time that we've all podcasters have agreed on a question. Nice. Keep lobbing them to us, audience. Please give us those easy ones that we can all agree on stuff. And then another one, as Darth Alec asks again. See, I told you he's going to have a lot of questions tonight. He says, "Do the storm hosts feel more distinct now?" Do you guys think that the storm hosts feel more distinct now?
I think so. I think they're doing a good job of making them distinct. Like you said, I didn't realize that these guys actually have a flaw too, where they take chaos stuff and put it on their bodies, right? Like little details like that, I think are cool and can easily be modeled, which I know requires conversion, but still super cool.
I'm going to agree. I think they are becoming more distinct, and even outside of the flaws, like they become more distinct as the rest of the setting gets fleshed out. Like if you would have told me who the Celestial Warbringers were in the start of second edition, I'd have no idea. I still barely do. But now I know they're the people in Olgu who live in Misthaven. That didn't exist before, but it does now, and it's starting to cement them. They're also the ones who like are more focused on Sacrosanct, whereas the Astral Templars are more Vanguard Chamber. And just like tying them to things as we add more things into the setting will just inherently create those distinctions for us.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, that calls to mind. So one of my storm hosts that I had one of my dudes painted up as is like the Knights of Azir, and like their initial blurb was that their goal is to know their prey better than the prey knows themselves. And so it was a Knight Venator with the bow and arrow. So I'm like, he knows his prey, like he's a hunter. That makes a lot of sense. That's why I have him painted in this color. But then it's evolved such that the Knights of Azir are now searchers of knowledge, and they work with the elves in Hish, like elven scholars, to like seek out knowledge, which is not completely. It's a evolution in a completely different direction than what I would have initially thought as they're prey hunters as opposed to literally knowledge hunters. So there is room to sort of evolve those storm hosts as well. One other thing I'll say is that I don't necessarily think the storm hosts always, to some degree, felt more distinct for me. Like this book didn't necessarily change my opinion of it, but I think what will continue to make them feel more distinct down the line is those stories that we get featuring characters in those storm hosts. I think do a great job of differentiating the storm hosts. Hamilcar is much different than Gardas, which is much different than Vandus or Barthas or Arum or whatever. Arun. In that you can describe them all you want to me to try and separate them out, but like it's going to be the characters in the stories that really are going to cement who those storm hosts are, and I think that's only going to get sort of expanded on as time goes on.
I would also add that I don't necessarily, now that I'm thinking about it, know that they did a better job of making the storm hosts distinct, but I think we as readers have a much better understanding of where all of the places are that these primary storm keeps are. And because we know the realms better, they are far more distinct in our head because we know the Knights Excelsior are from Excelsis. And we know what happened in Excelsis, right? We know, and that's the thing that actually makes them more distinct in my head is, that the Hammers of Sigmar are in Hammerhall. And I understand what that means together in my head because those make sense to me. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, right on. All right, so that's bringing us to the end of some of our standardized questions. Do you guys have any other free-form, jazz-type points of interest that you wanted to bring up, that you wanted to chat about before we start closing her out?
Nah.
No.
Nice.
Covered all of my notes that I totally have.
I think I'll continue the trend. We'll keep trucking along. A good way to one of the final things worth bringing up is highlighting any Black Library stories that we feel exemplify the faction and really give a good slice of life, a good view into how the faction operates. And do you guys have any Black Library stories you want to chat about or recommend featuring the Stormcast? There are a lot of them.
Yeah, I will talk about Storm Vault, which is a really cool story about, the titular Storm Vault and possible lost relics. But the reason I wanted to call it out is in relation to the Stormcast, it's the first time. I'm slowly trying to remember which Storm host, but like you had said,
Celestial Vindicators, right?
Yeah, Celestial Vindicators. Yep. So like you said, like you need a character to cement like what that faction means to you. I had no idea like what the Celestial Vindicators or their thing really was until I read that novel and got to see it from the point of view of someone within that group. So if you want to learn more about Stormcast and specifically this Storm host, I think it's a good book to pick up.
Yeah, we read that as a little book club that we did.
Yeah, we did.
Delightful. We should do that again. I agree. Paul, did you have any Black Library stories you wanted to highlight or recommend?
Yeah, go on the internet and type in Hamilcar and find the books with Hamilcar in it and read those because they're awesome.
And then when you're done, circle back around, read him again.
Yep.
Yeah, it's so good. So he's an Astral Templar. He exemplifies all that means. And for my money, the best character in the Mortal Realms. My recommendation. So Hamilcar obviously is the right answer all the time. But I'll also throw in a more recent one. It's good if you want to learn about sort of the present day Stormcast, and that's Thunderstrike, which is actually a novella by Richard Strachan from the Thunderstrike and Other Stories compilation. It's about a group of Thunderstrike clad Stormcast in Gur. The author is quickly becoming one of my favorite authors in Black Library, and he does a great job of sort of writing the introspection of these Stormcasts and gives you an insight into sort of who they are as, like, I'll say people, like literally people. One of the questions that we didn't get to was someone was asking about, are there examples of Stormcasts sort of showing their humanity? I'm paraphrasing a little bit, and this story is a great example of that. And then furthermore, because I'm the last one talking, I get to just add as many as I want. Since I love the Hallowed Knights, there is the Hallowed Knights series by Josh Reynolds. There's a whole bunch of stories. Go check out themortalrealms.com where I've spelled them all out. I've listed them all out. But it follows Gardas and his warrior chamber through all sorts of different adventures. It weaves all throughout the Reynolds verse, quote unquote, showing off the Stormcast in the Hallowed Knights in all their glory and all the antics that they get up to. Probably one of the best series in Age of Sigmar fiction. And so with that, we finally get to our reviews, our thoughts on the book, on the Battletome as a whole. We're gonna pull, not gonna pull any more punches. Lay it on me. Let's lead with Paul so you can show Will how to do it.
I really enjoyed this Battletome a lot more than I thought I was. I thought I was going to have a lot more fun looking at the Orc Battletome, which I did enjoy, but this one, like I said, almost every single paragraph was like, oh, that's something I hadn't thought about, or, oh, I didn't realize that was quite how that had played out. I did not expect to have 4 pages on the Dawnbringer Crusades, which is something I'm super interested in. So that was also amazing. There's just so much content, and I enjoyed reading pretty much everything. I definitely give it 8 spider legs out of 8 because it was super enjoyable. It increased my understanding of a lot of different things, and it also, I feel like it pushed the narrative forward quite a bit as well. So I enjoyed it.
Right on. Well, now you know how to do it. Well, what do you got?
So I also really enjoyed this. I definitely thought that like every page had something great, but like reading it for this podcast and refreshing it wasn't the first time I had read it. And the first time I read it, I almost felt like almost overwhelmed because there is so much, because the story of the Stormcast is the story of the Age of Sigmar. And I felt like we were rushing through it. And so like that's why every paragraph has like an amazing tidbit, because that tidbit could be like a whole book somewhere else. And that's like the only critique is there is so much good stuff. But in the end, it is all super enjoyable. So I'm going to give it 9 out of 12 great bolts of Sigmar.
You son of a, that was my, how dare you?
Yeah, took it.
He comes on and he steals your bit. I saw that. I saw that coming.
Got him. Hashtag got him. All right. I am torn on this Battletome. So this is actually the first Stormcast Battletome I've read since the very first one. So 5 Battletomes ago. I think it came out in 2015. So this is, however, if you read if you read most things in the Age of Sigmar, they're all kind of the Stormcast Battletomes, right? Like all of it sort of contributes to what the Stormcast Battletome is. So I feel like, at least going into this, I thought I hadn't missed much. I knew what there was to know, and I didn't know that there's going to be too much more to learn in this book. I will say, even looking backwards, not even focusing on like the AOS 3.0 stuff, there was plenty to learn that I didn't know about, that I'd sort of glossed over. I'd heard people reference, but I didn't necessarily know what it meant or what its ramifications were. And that sort of stuff, retrospectively, I actually loved. Like it filled in a lot of space in those things that I had thought I had known before, right? It's that stuff that filled in the blanks previously. Loved it. I thought that was great. However, I don't necessarily like the direction that they're going with this stuff. I feel like I've lost a lot of steam talking about it because this book has been out for a while. We've known the direction that Stormcast are going in 3.0 for a while. And so I feel like I've been talking in different channels ad nauseum about all the things I don't like about it. So the edge is sort of worn off a little bit. Suffice it to say, it seems as if this 3.0 version of Stormcast was intended to be a reboot without actually having to pay the price of a reboot, which is to say you get to keep everything that came before, but we're all not invalidating. It's clearly not invalidating the stuff that came before, but it's as soft a reboot as they come, and it definitely demarks a sort of new direction and clearly leaves a lot of the stuff not completely behind, but like there is a then and now. So to speak. And I don't like that. I don't like new books sort of creating that then and now. I like a continuation. I like a clean evolution. And that it doesn't feel that way with this. And now I'm curious. My opinion may change going forward. Now, if all they do is Thunderstrike and Thunderstrike-esque stuff going in the future, I'm going to continue to feel this same way, that we had 5 years, 6 years of history that they're sort of just leaving behind and going in a completely different direction. It seems like they didn't need to do that. I don't know what the right answer is, but it didn't seem like, I don't feel like it needed to be that. If they are true to their word, and sort of scattered throughout this book, they talk about how those with Thunderstrike aren't looking down on those without Thunderstrike, and that they're supposed to be supplementary and they're supposed to be sort of intermixed and spiced in. The Storm host, and there are still very clear roles for that old guard us, so to speak, in the Stormcast. And if they hold true to that, then I think maybe I could be won over, and that like this is yet just a different variation, in the same way that Sacrosanct is different, in the same way that the Vanguard or like Extremists are different. If you can prove to me that that's true going forward, then maybe I won't care as much. But I don't think they're going to do that. I think Thunderstrike is the way to go. And this 5 year, and it's a heavy 5 years. Like it is a weighty, full 5 years of Stormcast that I'm afraid they're going to leave behind. And that I don't like that. And that's not for me. So
I have a question for you.
Shoot. Don't literally shoot.
If this was the way that Stormcast looked when they released 5 years ago, would you have liked the Stormcast?
Yes, and actually that's a very good point, and one I had meant to bring up but I'd forgotten. The new models are awesome. This is clearly an example of model company first, and I love the new look, and I wish it had always looked this way, and then of course we wouldn't be in this situation, right? They wouldn't need to reboot it because it would always sort of had this aesthetic. I made the joke I feel like I've been harping on the Sigmarine thing too much. I normally don't even care about this sort of stuff, but the idea it's I could see how you could always make that connection between those poster boy type armies and each of their IPs, right? This new direction they're going is such a departure from Marines, but then also the departure from the Stormcast that we know. I can see why they do it. It makes a lot of sense. If I were in their shoes, I would be maybe forced to make the same decision, but it doesn't mean I have to like it. But short answer to your short question, yes, I would have loved if they would always look this way. Like just the infantry looks so cool. So it's a shame that it had to come to this, I guess. Anyways, that's that. The new models look awesome, and I loved sort of all the things that I would have been reading over the past 5 years, like up until that point. I really love that story, and we've been saying a lot tonight, and I feel like it's now going to be it's going to echo in my head quite a bit. But the history of the Stormcaster, the history of the Age of Sigmar, they are the same, and you get such a breadth of knowledge by reading, about the Stormcast, which I love. So for that, I'm all for it. Plus, if you play in the army, you got to buy the book anyway. So be it. All right, there's that. Any other final thoughts before we close it out?
My brain is empty. There are no thoughts.
If I shake it, there will be no sound. All right, here it comes. Get ready. Brace yourself. It's time for our reforging. But Sigmar Willie will be back soon. Like, subscribe, share, or leave a review. Join us on Discord. Drop a tip on our Patreon. Anything you can do will spread the word of Sigmar farther than we can on our own. Chat with us anytime about your thoughts on Twitter @TheMortalRealms. Paul, where can they find you on the internet?
At PJ Shard, PJSCHARD.
Ooh, nice. Will, where can they find you online?
They can find me at Severelon, SEVVIRELON. And you can also find Paul, myself, and Spencer at Path to Story, which is, again, our narrative play Age of Sigmar podcast.
Smart move. And I'm Aaron. You can find me on Twitter at Dosesos. And you can find all our Mortal Realms shows and content at www.themortalrealms.com. Oh my God. Again, not a competition, but look how big those waveforms are.
So juicy and full.
It's not the size of the waveform, it's how you use it.
Something about motion of the ocean, right? I feel like there's a way to really link those two together.
Yeah, it's in there.
Let's bite the bullet and get in there, get our hands dirty. I can't stop talking. Get me out of this. But
please help.
I need to hold just up. If we were doing video, I'd hold up a sign like, please stop me from talking. But